Welcome into the madness of free agency in the NFL, as well as the NFL draft upon us in just over 30 days. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and of course the Fantasy Football Players Championship over at myffpc.com. We got a banner show for you tonight. If you're all hooped out, we've got 2 great hours of nothing but fantasy football goodness with a focus on NFL free agency, the NFL draft, and fantasy football dynasty leagues. So many of you who are paying attention to fantasy football right now, this is what you want. And we got one of the best to help us out tonight. You know him from the Dynasty Think Tank podcast. You know him as a contributor from Football Guys. Perhaps you know him best for being the founder and CEO of Under the Helmet Dynasty at uthdynasty.com. You follow him on the X at Chad Parsons NFL. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Chad Parsons. Chad, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, we got free agency in the backdrop. We got NFL in front of us, and we got basketball on TV. I mean, what could be better this time of year?
So let me ask you this. I was going to ask you this prior to the show, and I forgot. Where are you located in the United States?
Well, we're home based in Florida, but we're out on the West Coast. We travel quite a bit. And honestly, West Coast is where it's at for sports. You don't have to stay up quite as late, especially with March Madness going till midnight plus. So happy to be out here for this time of year.
So this is the reason I bring that up. You say Florida, you say West Coast, and yet I look at your X feed at Chad Parsons NFL, and you are tagging some of my favorites: Steve Zabin, Josh Albrecht, Armin Sarian, guys who are all on the air in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now I'm in Appleton, which is about an hour and a half north of that. But those guys, the radio station I work for, we have those guys on via syndication on our radio station. I'm like, how does Chad Parsons know these guys? What's your connection to Wisconsin?
One quick Steve Zabin story. I grew up by Santa Barbara, and when I was a kid, I actually went to those UCSB Gaucho games that he was the color man. He was one of the announcers at some of those big games, Brian Shaw, etc. When I was a kid, followed him in terms of DC radio. I was there for a number of years, and radio voices, or radio personalities, you follow them. And when he went full-time to Milwaukee, I did too. And now I'm in love with their whole crew and, Zabe Vegas and going out to the Caribbean every year and all that stuff. So I listen every single day. Yeah,
that's awesome because I do too. So that's good. We're located in very different locations, but we are connected by Wisconsin sports talk, which I love. Coming up on the show tonight, we're going to go around the NFL. We're going to talk about everything that's going on in the league right now. There's plenty. And by the way, contrary to popular opinion, if you're just paying attention on the national media right now, they'd say college basketball is the only thing that's going on. We got a ton of stuff in the NFL that's going on as well. We're going to find out where Chad Parsons stands on many of the players that have new jerseys this year, like Derrick Henry, like Marquise Brown. But we're also going to get his takes on players that stayed with the same teams: Nico Collins, Mike Evans, Zay Flowers. We're going to talk about that, as well as in the second hour, we're going to ask Chad, new segment on the show, what's going to happen to ... And we'll talk about the Kirk Cousins Falcons. We're going to talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba now that Tyler Lockett is locked up, for lack of a better term, for the next couple of years. Tyjae Spears, Zach Moss, and more in that segment. And then we'll get into a heavy rookie segment coming on in the final segment of the show. A lot of quarterback questions. Drake May we're going to focus on. We'll talk a little bit about Bucky Irving, the Xaviers, Worthy and Leggett, and then we'll get into the Florida State guys, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, that I think Chad has some very interesting things to say about both those players as well. As a reminder, the 2024 Fantasy Pros Championship is live at myffpc.com. $1 million grand prize, $6 million prize pool. Make sure you're signing up at myffpc.com. We also have the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments going on with the FFPC at myffpc.com. You can register for as little as $35. You can win up to a $25,000 grand prize in both of those tournaments, which will end on April 25th. They get cut off prior to the NFL draft, and Dynasty is going to be a heavy focus on tonight's show. If you're looking to play Dynasty Fantasy Football, we have a ton of Dynasty orphans over at myffpc.com. Some as little as $1. Play fantasy football like Chad Parsons and Eric Balkman do 365 days a year with the Dynasty teams over at myffpc.com. Shout out to our producer, the man behind the glass tonight, Matt Deutsch. Let's get into it, and let's lead it off with a rookie. Marvin Harrison Jr., Chad. He didn't participate in the combine, and he is not participating in Ohio State's Pro Day. I will borrow the Jerry Seinfeld line when he was racing against Duncan Meyer. I choose not to run, is what Marvin Harrison said. And I guess the thing is here, I mean, for me personally, I saw enough of this guy in college. I don't necessarily need to see anything else for him. I'm fine with him sitting out. How do you view Marvin Harrison Jr., knowing that he is not participating in any of these post-collegiate season pro days or combine contests?
Well, I'm a big Malik Neighbors fan, but Marvin Harrison Jr., he seems like a top 5 lock, that he's not going to get out of the top 5. And his expected draft position right now is right around 4, plus or minus a fraction or two. And the big thing for me, and in the age of tracking, we can do our best. We used to have to just guess. I remember the Devontae Bookers of the world, Kenneth Dixon, that running back class always got me, because you get guys that don't run, you assume they're athletic, and they ultimately are not athletic when they get to the NFL stage. Marvin Harrison, again, he's going to go very high in the draft. Top 5 is basically a bulletproof wide receiver prospect we've seen with Jamar Chase and others in recent years. So with Marvin Harrison Jr., he's measured at 22 plus miles per hour when you look at some of the on-field testing at Ohio State. Therefore, the biggest risk factor is, what if he bombed his 40? And I really don't think there is much of a chance of that, that based on, and I start doing comps when you look at max speeds and sizes and all that. So I'm pretty comfortable saying he's a 4.38 to 4.45 at worst speed guy. And he's prototypically sized. Again, he's been bred for this. Literally, he has a Hall of Fame wide receiver for his dad, and he's going to go very high. So I really don't think there's a lot of risk here. And I think one of the biggest factors is, he probably has allegiances from, whether it's Arizona, whether it's the Chargers, someone in that range that says, you're not going to get past this point, that there's not really a point. You can't go 101 or 102 if you run a 4.30. Like, there's not really incentive to do so. So we used to see this a little bit more with some of those big time running backs that would go in the top 5 to 10 years ago, eons ago. It's a dinosaur type of idea. But I think Marvin Harrison is doing sort of that as one of the iconic prospects in this class that, hey, I don't need to run.
And yeah, he doesn't. It's not changing my philosophy on it at all. We're a month out roughly from the NFL draft. Is it too early to start penning in Marvin Harrison to the Cardinals? I know we saw a report today that Arizona's looking at, potentially trading that pick or what have you. But we're getting so close to the start of the draft. I've become very, very skeptical about the reports I'm reading. Your thoughts on where Marvin Harrison's going to go? How likely is it going to be the Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah, Arizona, if they don't trade out, I mean, they have a black hole basically getting rid of Rondell Moore. Marquise Brown is gone. And so Marvin Harrison would see, obviously, a attachment to a good enough quarterback. We can argue how good Kyler Murray is as a passer, but he's good enough. And then you look at the fact that it's Trey McBride and a bag of bolts basically for targets. So he would be an optimal target option that would produce in year one, someone that you would project in the top 25 to 30 of the wide receiver position, even as a rookie. And Malik Neighbors is the one that might slip a few spots and actually might go to a suboptimal spot. And hopefully, again, the Giants are another opening at 6. We'll see about the Chargers. They could be a trade down spot. But again, those are two guys that should go very high.
If we focus on the Cardinals for just one more second, Michael Wilson, is he a dynasty asset or is he a roster clogger at this point, month prior to the NFL draft?
Yeah, roster clogger is a very adept term, and he's kind of the best left. I like what we saw from Greg Dortch just a little bit, a year ago. He's always hit that. In terms of efficiency per route, Michael Wilson is about the average, so he didn't really command targets, and you say, what else was there stopping him? So I'm more on the skeptical side when you talk about a non-first round wide receiver that now is going into a spot where they're probably going to bring in a true alpha in Marvin Harrison Jr., or maybe multiple guys in the first 3-4 rounds. So Michael Wilson's that type that, especially in FFPC, you kind of mentioned that format, and it's not overly deep. You can only really roster 5, 6, 7 wide receivers. You've got to be careful. And Michael Wilson is the type that, hey, you can trade up in your draft maybe, but roster clogger is probably where he settles, because if he's not the wide receiver 1 and he's already got a strong tight end and probably a strong wide receiver to fight off for targets, that's going to be tough to break the top 50 or 60.
Let's keep the wide receiver conversation going here, Chad. Senior writer for The Athletic, Adam Johns, had this report on the new Bears receiver, Keenan Allen, that said that he's open to playing for the Bears beyond 2024. He's in the final year of that extension that he signed with the Chargers prior to the COVID season of 2020. This is his age 32 year. However, he is coming off a career high in receptions in 108. He had the second most receiving yards of his entire career with just over 1,200. And he only played in 13 out of 17 games last year. So if he wasn't hurt over the final 4 games, this dude would have put up a crazy town banana pants year, which is would be unbelievable. Now, he said the Bears and him will get together on an extension down the line. The question here with Keenan Allen, yes, he's been coming off these great years. Yes, he's getting up there in years. But yes, he's also been very productive here. How do you view Keenan Allen? How big of a dynasty asset is he right now? Buy, sell, hold. How are you viewing him?
Well, you definitely have to hold, as a contender. A lot of times you get to 30 plus, 31. The Mike Evanses of the world, the Keenan Allens of the world. Heck, Christian McCaffrey at the running back position. You have to hold these guys if you're in your competitive window because they make a difference. And frankly, the market generally isn't going to give you what they're worth to your team and for your lineup. I would point something out, which I didn't think this going in. I am one of the biggest Keenan Allen fans on the planet. But let's look at the equation. I always kind of look at historics and then we kind of go from there, where Bears are going to have a rookie quarterback. The average 101 quarterback finishes QB 24 or so in fantasy in year one. So if we put Caleb Williams into that camp, let's say it's 20 to 25. The point is you're not getting elite quarterback play right away. You're looking for flashes, and year two, year three, it comes together. And now you have DJ Moore and Keenan Allen both fighting for number one, number two, 1A, 1B, however you want to put this. You've got two guys, and Cole Kmet's going to be a viable number three. You've got all that going on, fighting for huge upside. And so I would say with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, it hurts both of them. You now have two guys that could dominate an offense, and now they're stuck with a rookie quarterback, relatively speaking. But whoever loses that, I still think both of these guys are going to lack upside. I think it could be wide receiver 20 to 24 for whoever is the top guy, and then maybe wide receiver 35 to 45 for the secondary guy when you look at a decent offense with two good wide receivers, but they've got to split that pie. This is not exactly Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on a high-flying Miami offense. So I think you have to be really careful about anointing big upside to either guy, and at 32 years old, obviously that hurts Keenan Allen more than it does DJ Moore a few years younger.
Yeah, and that's my next question here, because DJ Moore, this is his age 26 season, so he is 6 years younger than Allen. From a dynasty standpoint, do you give a little bit of an uptick for Moore because of the age factor, given that, Keenan Allen, I know he's been doing it for all these years, but there's no guarantee that, he missed the last 4 games of last season. I don't think we're necessarily concerned about DJ Moore being too long in the tooth, but we are with Keenan Allen. How much of an uptick would you give DJ Moore over Keenan Allen from a dynasty perspective?
I think a good amount, and you have to be very sensitive to age curves, both from historical perspectives, but we obviously will acknowledge that Keenan Allen's an all-time player, but durability, and you have to say, the Chargers didn't really have to make this move. They cleaned house. They had to get rid of Mike Williams, in my opinion, but they didn't have to get rid of both of them. They chose to. Durability has been an issue, and also good a lot of times to get out a year too early as opposed to a year too late. There's a big salary attached there. If Keenan Allen, here's the dynasty perspective. If he has one significant injury, you mentioned he missed a few games. What if he misses a few more? What if it's 7 or 8 games missed? Then you have a 32-year-old that probably is splitting elite targets with another quality wide receiver, and he's a free agent at the end of the year, attached to a quarterback that maybe shows promise but not elite. And it's just, you put that equation together, and all of a sudden Keenan Allen could be traded for, right now he might be, a second plus sort of valuation, maybe the latest of first round picks if someone's really in on Keenan Allen right now. But if that injury occurs in season, it might be a third plus. He might be, again, right in that range of near worthless at 33 years old. We see this with every wide receiver, and very few turn into Terrell Owens or someone like that.
What about getting back to Keenan Allen for dynasty evaluation? If you are contending, if you do have a very good team, you're going to be competing for a title this year, you have Keenan Allen in your team. Is it best to hang on to him? Or if somebody's offering you a late first round pick, do you just say, okay, the heck with it, I'm going to make this move right now and get better right away? What would you do?
I think it depends on the format. So the two main formats, we have Superflex, where it flexes a quarterback. Obviously, it's a good quarterback class, so it enhances those rookie pick values. If it's a late first, even 111, 112 in your typical league, I think you cash out in a Superflex. But when you subtract 3, 4, 5 quarterbacks that are going to go in the top 10 or 11 in your draft, in a one quarterback, I think you probably pass on that for the upside of Keenan Allen if you're in a contending window. You have to be really careful to say you're not contending at this point in the year, because guess what? You get to August, you get to September, things change, and all of a sudden you get off to a good start, and you're like, I wish I had those players that I sold in the spring and summer months for rookie fever. So I think you have to be careful on that front. And then the other front is, you have to realize he's 32 years old. If you can get a first a lot of times, that's the best it will ever be. And the only way in season you get that if he produces like he did last year on a per game basis. And that is a major question mark, as we already outlined.
Dom Guzzetti, who's watching us on YouTube tonight, he has a question. He wants to know if we can shift our focus from Dynasty to redraft between DJ Moore and between Keenan Allen. Right now in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, I looked up the data on fantasymojo.com, at Fantasy Mojo on the X, Darren Armani, the godfather of the FFPC Pros versus Joe's competition. I would strongly urge every one of you who's watching this, who is playing in the FFPC, get a subscription over to Fantasy Mojo. I'm looking at the ADP right now on this, Chad, and I see DJ Moore having an ADP of wide receiver 13 at the 302. Now, Keenan Allen, and this is reflection of basically the last 3 weeks. So this is not a total reflection of after the Keenan Allen trade. But Keenan Allen, wide receiver 26 at the 412. So you can tell the difference between these guys right now in ADP as far as what you have to invest in to get these guys. It's almost 2 rounds. It's about a round and a half right now. What one would you rather have? How do you view these two players in a redraft format?
I think it's up in the air. And when you say that there's enough of a price difference, like you said, round and a half, couple rounds, and it's significant, considering a drop off at another wide receiver spot for your lineup or at running back, I think you really have to consider Keenan Allen as the cheaper option, because we don't know. And frankly, for their careers, yards per route run, they've been pretty similar. They've been, you look at their career arc in that capacity, and Keenan Allen's been an alpha. DJ Moore has been as well. So again, I think you take the discount, you take the cheaper guy at this point, because redraft, all that age stuff we mentioned, it matters a little bit, but doesn't matter all that much. And Keenan Allen on a per game basis has been awesome.
Speaking of the Chargers wide receivers, or at least in this case, former Chargers wide receivers, Mike Williams. Well, actually, before we get to Mike Williams, let me just ask you this, Chad. You mentioned that the Chargers did not have to make this move to trade Keenan Allen. Now, we knew their cap situation was not great. We knew that there will be blood, as it were, with the Chargers cap situation. Mike Williams gets moved. He gets cut. The Jets sign him. Keenan Allen gets traded. But this is with the Chargers making sure that Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa both have their contracts intact, and they keep those guys on the team. They let Austin Eckler go to free agency. So I look at this and I say, okay, they kept the 2 defensive guys, but all 3 of those offensive guys were deemed expendable. And that leads me to believe, okay, do I need to look at more seriously Quentin Johnston and Joshua Palmer? Because these are the guys apparently that the Chargers brass is believing in, because they let Allen go. They let Williams go. They have a really good quarterback in Herbert. Gerald Everett not on the team anymore as well. Do I need to be taking a longer look at Quentin Johnston and Joshua Palmer? I felt like I kind of knew who these guys were, but maybe I don't.
Yeah, I think when you have a fresh start, that could be bailing on the previous regime's selections. Quentin Johnston was not good. I was a fan of his coming out as a prospect, but the way that he was ignored in the offense, the way I didn't like the targets he received last year from Justin Herbert, he almost always went the other direction in terms of where his eyes were for first read, second read. Obviously, if you have Keenan Allen, that's where it should go. So we cleaned that out. I think the biggest takeaway from what remains is Joshua Palmer is a low ceiling option. That he's going to always be that Robin. He's going to always be that ancillary guy. And I think you have to keep in mind that if you are seeking, let's say it's the mid to later rounds of a best ball, Josh Palmer has appeal. Now, I think if you're doing lineups, you're seeking big upside on a regular and predictable basis. That's going to be a little tougher. Palmer's probably going to be someone at best as wide receiver, 25 to 40. But Quentin Johnston, if the light comes on, if this offense is different, if it's maybe, a lot of ground and pound and then shots, that could benefit Quentin Johnston. And the other part is, even if they go wide receiver in the first round, let's remember you have an edge as an incumbent, as a veteran to some degree, as opposed to a rookie. So even if they draft Malik Neighbors, even if they draft Rome Odunze or someone in the top part of the draft, I still think that you're going to have advantage Quentin Johnston for a second. And he should be dirt cheap because everyone is off of him after a pretty horrific rookie season.
What would you give up for Quentin Johnston in a single quarterback dynasty league right now?
Yeah, I think the price point is generally about a third in Superflex, and one quarterback, I think you're looking at more of a later second. And when you talk about what will I look at prospect-wise in that range of the draft, you will not get a look at a first-round wide receiver. So you are paying and getting the discount for that poor career start. But we've seen plenty of misfires in terms of high efficiency or low efficiency in year one turning out. And the one thing you want to do in general, be a little patient with these first round wide receivers. Now, someone like Kadarius Toney, they start changing teams. There's a lot of malcontent sort of vibes. That's a whole different story. But Quentin Johnston locked in with Justin Herbert, and now you're getting a big discount. Like I said, maybe the later second round, especially in FFPC, you kind of want to take somebody that you're going to get clarity in September. And then you can just dump them and go to the waiver wire with that roster spot. So if you're sitting there, hey, I did well last year, I've got 208 to 212, you throw out for Quentin Johnston, he's your wide receiver 4, 5, 6, and you see what happens August into September. And then again, if it doesn't work out, you're just going to cycle through.
Really difficult for me to just say no to that pedigree this quick. Like I think, as you said, you got to give these guys a little bit of leeway here. Now let's go back to the former Chargers wide receivers, Mike Williams. He is now with the Jets. Tore his ACL in September. He says he's going to be ready for week one. Chad, I don't know if you do this, but I definitely do it. I always take players assessing their own injuries with a grain of salt because they always believe that they're more healthy than they let on. It's why they're competitors. It's why they've reached, or part of the reason why they've reached this level. Now, he had ACL surgery, I believe, in December. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. And if he is ready for week one, it wouldn't be all that surprising given how early in the season he tore his ACL. Garrett Wilson's on the Jets. Aaron Rodgers should be back for week one for the New York Jets this year. What do you make of Mike Williams? From a dynasty perspective, it's tough because it's like you should be able to get him for free. I actually picked him up in one of my leagues off waivers last year after he tore his ACL. Somebody who was clearly disillusioned with Mike Williams' career just let him go. I picked him up, and I have very low expectations, but how good of a landing spot was this for his dynasty value with the Jets?
Well, the pivot point is we don't know. We don't really have a good sense what the Jets are going to do in the first round at 10. That feels like it could be a Brock Bowers spot. I wouldn't say that they're out on wide receiver in the first 2-3 rounds. Here's the biggest thing. Mike Williams' durability has been a huge issue. He's almost 30 years old. And when you put those things together, and, obviously the Chargers weren't going to keep him, but he has not been on the field. And even by adjusting for points per game, he still has not had a top 20 finish in his career. You put him over, Garrett Wilson has mired. He's been very good with a horrible quarterback play. So Aaron Rodgers should raise that up. But if you're talking about an ancillary target in an offense that has been mired with injuries, I would say, with Mike Williams, a best ball special applies here. You get him super late because you don't care when he's going to be healthy, especially if it's one of those where you draft 25, 30 roster spots. You just kind of sit there, set it and forget it. He is that viable target that can have some 100-yard games, some multiple touchdown games in a best case. But in a traditional shallower roster type format, you got to be super careful with guys like Mike Williams because you are operating with Aaron Rodgers. What is he going to be in this offense? Is he going to be a top 8 to 10 quarterback? Highly questionable at this point in his career coming back. What's the mobility? And then you say he's going to be the number 2 target at best. And Breece Hall is a huge factor. So I just think that Mike Williams is one that don't go chasing your tail thinking there's top 15 to 20 predictable upside here because there probably isn't.
Might be a better best ball guy than a managed lineup league guy for sure. Okay, so speaking of head scratchers, Jerry Jeudy. So this is a guy who started the offseason with the Broncos. He gets traded to the Cleveland Browns, and as Ian Rappaport reported a couple of days ago, the Browns extended Judy's contract. It's worth up to $58 million, up to, I know it means nothing, but $41 million guaranteed for a guy who's never played one down with Deshaun Watson and on his new team with his new head coach, new OC, new offense, new quarterback, new everything. This is weird to me. Now, the contract is about $14 million in average annual value. Very similar to Lockett's contract, Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis, the one that he just inked with the Jaguars. This was a situation where the Browns get him in exchange for 5th and 6th round picks, and now they have Jerry Jeudy playing opposite Amari Cooper. I was very unexcited about Jerry Jeudy. I have been very unexcited about Jerry Jeudy the last couple of years, Chad. But now I see that an organization went out, gave up multiple draft picks to acquire this guy, and are now giving him $41 million guaranteed. Similar to what I brought up earlier with maybe I need to take a longer look about Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston. Do I need to take a longer look at Jerry Jeudy? Because I think the Browns are seeing something that I have not seen yet.
I think Jeudy is more of a spec play for the Browns and for us, our purposes, probably more towards 2025. Amari Cooper is there. He's one of my favorites. And let's not forget, this is the Brown franchise that backed up the Brinks truck with a big trade, and B, a huge contract to Deshaun Watson. So how has that worked out? This could be a lesser version, a less pricey and potentially detrimental version there at wide receiver. But Jerry Jeudy has not been good. The fact that he has the Alabama pedigree, the fact that he was a big name in college has really gotten him a lot of allegiance that he shouldn't have. I thought after the first year or two, finishing outside of wide receiver 60 both years in adjusted points per game, and you say he's still getting a lot of chances. Cortland Sutton essentially outplayed him, and Cortland Sutton has been a relative disappointment over that span. So now Denver bails. I don't think Jerry Jeudy was in a horrific situation, and now we're assuming the Browns, where they love multiple tight ends, they love the run game, we think it's going to be better. He's not going to be over Amari Cooper. And I think maybe if there's an injury or if it's into 2025, we can have a conversation. But I think it's really risky for the Browns in order to secure that. Let him play it out. Let's see what he is in your ecosystem for 8 to 10 months and see where you go. And you have the inside track to maybe re-sign him in the first few months of 2025. But now they're pot committed. It's a reasonable salary. I get it. But they've taken a lot of shots, Elijah Moore, et cetera, that have not really worked out. They drafted David Bell. So they are looking for anything under every rock at wide receiver. We do know they have Amari Cooper and David Njoku, so at least they have a good start if that doesn't work out.
Based on the Browns' history in acquiring players and throwing money at players, you see this deal with Jeudy. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. The money itself should not be a needle mover of how we feel about him in Dynasty, right?
Right. And this is not a high-flying passing game. So just remember, Amari Cooper there, Amari Cooper vibrant and healthy, it's probably not going to be a big fantasy factor. Even if Jerry Jeudy is quote-unquote good, it could be wide receiver 50 to 60 this year, and that's most of what we've seen through 4 years from Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's go back out to the West Coast and talk Chargers here. Daniel Popper, who covers the Los Angeles Chargers for The Athletic, said that he believes Gus Edwards is going to have a quote-unquote big role in the Los Angeles offense this upcoming season. Now, a 2-year deal is what the team and Edwards agreed to. Greg Roman is is now out there with the Chargers. He's the OC with Baltimore under with Gus Edwards the last couple of years as well. Popper thinks he's going to have a big role. Now, Edwards did get in the end zone a lot last year, which was great. I think he had just over 800 rushing yards as well. I still think that, I know you see this as well. A lot of people are excited to see what the Chargers do on day 2 of the draft, because that could be the real winner in the Chargers running back sweepstakes. We have to wait another month to see what's going to happen here. What do we do with Gus Edwards in the meantime? If we have him on our dynasty teams, are we switching him out for a second round pick at this point and just hope that the Chargers add somebody in the draft and we can get out on our Edwards shares? Are we collecting Edwards? Because regardless of what the Chargers do on day 2 or maybe even day 3 of the draft, Edwards is still going to have a role in this offense. It's not talked about a lot because Gus Edwards is not necessarily a massive difference maker in fantasy football. But I do think if we're playing on the margins here, getting this Chargers running back situation is going to be very integral in fantasy success in 2024 in dynasty leagues. And I think in order to get the Chargers running back situation right, we have to get Gus Edwards right.
Yeah, the hope is obviously the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh turn into more of a balanced or even run-centric offense. Obviously, shedding the wide receivers and aligning with some offensive line and tight ends and everything they've been doing have been showing that they're going to shift into that direction. Gus Edwards, 29 years old. He really was boosted by being attached to Lamar Jackson for a lot of those years and his peak moments, if you will. But I think you do have to be concerned that they're going to add somebody. The depth chart right now has Isaiah Spiller, who's been a disappointment, and the number 2 spot, and really no one else of size or import on that depth chart, which means they're probably not good enough to say pass in the draft at some point. It's a draft that might be more appealing for value in rounds 4 and 5 for the running back position. But when I look at the Chargers, they have a pick 65 to 70 there in the early third round. That's a key spot. It might be running back 2, might be running back 3, but someone notable. And that's sort of the range, 50 to 70, where it's expected to see running back 1 and maybe 2 or 3 come off the board to start the position. And Gus Edwards is the type. And I think it's important to mention that this time of year, you have to ask yourself, if I'm going to buy, do I think the price is higher now or higher post-draft or higher when we get to August, September? And I think if you're going to buy, you want to make sure they don't draft a guy in round 2 or 3, or maybe add Ezekiel Elliott, or maybe add someone that's still notably out there in the free agent pool. So if you're a buyer, I think you want to wait on tenuous situations like this. And then if you're selling, if you can get a second now, again, I don't think Gus Edwards is going to make that much of a difference. So you get a second round pick, you stay liquid, stay flexible, because I think a lot of people assume, hey, I trade him for a later second this year. That's it. I'm going to draft a rookie versus Gus Edwards. No, you can trade that pick for a wide receiver. You can trade it for a future pick. You have a lot of flexibility. It's basically a blank check that's not going to go stale, or it's a cake that has good eggs in it. So I think that Gus Edwards is one that you shouldn't be too scared about trading him away if you have him, and that he's going to end up burning you with a top 10 to 12 season. I think that's pretty unlikely with his lack of receiving profile and the ambiguity of what if Isaiah Spiller steps up? He's much younger. And what if they draft someone notable?
Yeah, I think those are all things to keep in mind, and understanding that if you trade Edwards, then maybe it is that cake with good eggs in it, and like you can make do with that, right? Because people, and especially this time of year, Chad, you know this better than anybody. The picks right now are, as we get closer to the draft, they become more and more valuable because there are no player names assigned to those picks. They could be whatever you want them to be, and that's how you take advantage right now. So I'm with you on the Edwards thing. In other running back news and this isn't like a big name running back, but I think it's interesting because I think this news may affect a big name running back. But getting back to the Browns, they signed Deontay Foreman, who was with the Bears last year. Now, the Bears signed Foreman. They drafted Roschon Johnson, and then Foreman didn't get a lot of run September and October. There was injuries in that backfield. Then he got some run, and then they got healthy, and then he was kind of an inactive player the remainder of the season. Cleveland signs him, and Cleveland's backfield is kind of a question mark as well. Nick Chubb, who was already getting up there in years, like he's not a young running back anymore. He has multiple surgeries to repair a nasty knee injury that we saw on national TV in primetime last year. Is the Foreman signing a commentary on how the Browns feel about the recovery for Chubb? Because you're looking at Jerome Ford, who was okay at best when he had to take over the backfield and be an every down guy there. Because if they don't have Chubb, they do need bodies, and now they have Foreman. Does this Foreman signing affect the way you were thinking about Nick Chubb's knee injury recovery at all?
Yeah, I think it has to. I think whatever calculus you had on a possible PUP list, a designation to start the season, I think you have to increase that number. Are we up to 25, 30, 40%? I think it's realistic to have that concern with Nick Chubb. Is he going to be a second half of the year player? Is he going to be, a late October sort of player and beyond? And we hope at his age as a power back that he comes back as close to full strength as we possibly can get. But I do think, Jerome Ford, he split time with Kareem Hunt, and this could just be a Kareem Hunt type addition to say, we don't want Ford to have to carry everything. So Foreman, let's also remember, it was years ago. He was rising, going to take Lamar Miller's job there in Houston. Achilles injury. It's been a long journey back for Deontay Foreman, and just a huge success story for that position and that injury, because Foreman has come all the way back with Carolina, other stops, of just being relevant and being that 225 plus pound back that can move, that we really like coming out of Texas. So I think it makes it messy, because if Chubb is on the PUP, we go into week one, and I don't think, unless we have glaring signs coming out of preseason, I think you have to think it's going to be a split with Ford and Foreman, and both of them are probably going to be low running back twos, because it's going to be a lot of ambiguity until we see it, I think, with that split.
Yeah, the Cleveland, again, the Cleveland offense in general, we already talked about Jerry Jeudy. That's going to be a fascinating thing to watch as we move not only through drafting season until the NFL draft, but then through June and July and August. We'll get a better handle on it, but right now we're using limited information here on trying to figure that situation out. Now, Another running back situation in the AFC that I think is worth talking about. Again, not necessarily because the Raiders signed Alexander Mattison, but because how this affects Zamir White in Dynasty. I was talking about this on one of my other shows. I think there's two ways you can look at this, Chad. Raiders signed Mattison. Oh, that's bad for Zamir White because now he's got to compete with somebody for touches. But on the flip side, is this good for Zamir White that they're signing a guy that is not a big-time difference maker, that's been kind of an accumulator over the last couple of years? How big of a threat is Mattison to Zamir White? This might actually be a good thing for Zamir White's dynasty value because you look at this from the standpoint the Raiders believe in White. If they didn't, they would have signed somebody bigger or drafted somebody bigger than Mattison. Instead, they go with Mattison here. I think this is good things for Zamir White's dynasty value.
Yeah, I think if you're a fan of Zamir White, this is about the best case scenario. And I say that because you have a thin depth chart. Amir Abdullah has been, on that depth chart for quite some time. He's a sub-sized guy. They use him in those passing down packages or just occasional change of pace. And they're going to add somebody. So if you say within the range of outcomes, who are they going to sign? Alexander Mattison, who basically lost the job last year to Ty Chandler as we were going through the season. That's tough. A guy with more pedigree with the job. I thought the Vikings would keep him this year, frankly. I mean, it was a pretty low level deal relative to running back. And yet they go, we're just going to try something else, anything else. So I think it's good news for both guys because Zamir White, if they're going to add somebody, add someone who lost the job last year, who is generally underwhelmed for a couple years. And so Zamir White has to feel more comfort that it's his job. And then that might take him out of notable rookie additions. Maybe they do draft someone around 5 or 6 or something like that. But I do think Alexander Mattison is going to be one that you would assume wins that running back 2 job, which would be good news for Zamir White, who definitely flashed with some big, strong games over the last month of the season. So I think for both ends, you also talk about Mattison securing a number 2 job. That was probably the best case scenario in free agency as an injury away option, where we already know that the range of outcomes isn't great with him in terms of if he does get a clarified start next season. We saw that with the Dalvin Cook era. But I do think it's good news for Mattison of saying he's the running back 2 now, and it's likely after the draft now he's the running back 2 somewhere, and it happens to be with Raiders.
In a vacuum, just getting back to when you talk about, well, if you're a fan of Zamir White, this is good news. Are you a fan of Zamir White as far as talent and situation? How did you feel about Zamir White prior to this Mattison signing, in a vacuum?
I think Zamir White, you have to always be a little concerned. This is sort of like Dameon Pierce. They show flashes early on. They don't have strong enough pedigree. Every once in a while, Lamar Miller, those types will pan out from day 3. But I think you're always going to be looking over your shoulder. This is a class that even if they draft a guy early day 3, should feel threatened a little bit. And also Zamir White, let's go back to Georgia. He has not really been a workhorse at any stage of the game. He had multiple injuries, multiple serious injuries there, really derailed him after being a 5-star recruit. And it was really one good month. So we are projecting almost like Arian Foster that 1 month equals the next year he's going to be some breakout star. Possible, but let's remember this is an offense with questionable quarterback. How good are they going to be on offense in general? And Zamir White, he's not out of the woods. A round 4 guy does not just waltz into the NFL draft whistling and saying, I'm good here, nothing to see, I have no threats. There are threats everywhere when you're a day 3 lack of pedigree option, because we've seen guys even like, I remember Trey Mason. It's a verb now. Trey Mason means Todd Gurley could be the pick at any point in time, even if you're a round 3 pick and had a good rookie season. So Zamir White, you should hold your breath a little bit. I do think if you can get a 1st-round pick right now, I would get flexible and cash out for that. And I think it's possible in the marketplace because, again, the price isn't going to be overtly higher after the NFL draft, but the risk is he could fall down a full round, I think, in terms of market value.
This is why you watch this show for actionable advice like that you could be doing right now in late March leading into April to make sure that your dynasty teams are in the best shape possible come September. This show is in the best shape possible with Chad Parsons from Under the Helmet Dynasty, the Dynasty think tank as well, joining me today. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to find out what Chad stands on certain players. Josh Jacobs is now a Green Bay Packer. Deontay Johnson is a Carolina Panther. We'll get into Jameson Williams and what his role is going to be in Detroit this year as well. Chad Parsons, I'm Eric Balkman. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. We'll be right back.
The thing with Dynasty is that it's so hard to get a good league going. Like, it's very difficult to get all these friends that are going to be paying attention, or they're going to stick with it, and they're not going to say, "Oh, I don't want to play anymore. My team stinks. Find somebody else next year." Like, and then you're collecting dues, and then you're getting in arguments, and you're arguing with people on Twitter about dues. Like, we've seen too much of that going on. So it's very difficult. And what happens is you find like 5 or 6 good people that want to play, and then you don't have enough people, and you fill the league with a bunch of weirdos. So what I like doing, honestly, at this stage is if I'm going to play Dynasty, I want to play on a nice, clean, serious, professional site, and I go to FFPC to play, right? FFPC has never had a league fold. Eric Balkman over there told me that. He's like, if somebody has to leave a league, we just fill it. So your option is you can go and do a startup, and like Jack said in the chat, you start it, and then you go and you figure out who you're going to take from the top down. And if you want to do like a long rebuild, or a long-term team, or if you want to try and win right away and get a bunch of vets, you can do that. Or you can adopt an orphan team, and with that you go out and somebody quit, and that's so much fun, because then you take their team and you have all these guys that you like, but then you have all of these guys that they had that you don't like, and that's actually way more fun, because then you can trade all those guys, and it's so much fun to trade. Like when I go to orphan teams, I used to say, "Oh, I'm not going to take this team because all the players, I don't like them. I only want players I do like." But I've realized that it's actually more fun to take the teams that have a couple guys you really like and a couple guys that everyone else likes that you don't like, and then trade them. Like go and grab an orphan team like Gabe Davis and trade him to some Gabe Davis guy. So go do that now. Use you can use the QR code here, or a link in the description, or go to myffpc.com. Just make sure you use promo code COOP when you get set up. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. And that's another thing. When you make a league with your friends, Coop isn't giving you $25, right? You have to pay the full dues. This time you get a little discount. So yeah, go over there. And also for you maniacs out there, they do have high stakes leagues. So these leagues, if you want, you can go big time. I know some of the redraft leagues. We announced on this channel a redraft league that 10K buy-in. I'm not sure the Dynasty ones go that high, but they go into the thousands. So if you want to take this real seriously and get crazy with it, do it. That's the place to do it. myffpc.com, promo code COOP, baby. Go get set up.
18 minutes until the top of the hour as the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network rolls on. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and of course the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, being joined tonight by Chad Parsons. Chad Parsons and NFL is the X handle, founder, CEO of UTH Dynasty, that's under the helmet Dynasty, uthdynasty.com, and of course a contributor to the Dynasty Think Tank show and the Football Guys staff as well. Chad, I should give you an opportunity here too. You have a Patreon as well. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Patreon.com/UTH. And a lot of people, Patreon is popular for artists or any variety of patronage and support. And what I use it as is another content stream. I have a VIP chat. So if you're into Dynasty, I always say I've got dozens of the best Dynasty owners on the planet. And we talk Dynasty and their teams and their drafts. We all live vicariously and talk scenarios and strategy every single day of the year. So there's never a dull moment in there as one of the peak features. And one other thing I want to say is, I give away the draft guide. I used to sell a draft guide in the spring months with the NFL draft, the prospects, and with the Dynasty slant on it. And now I just give it away to my biggest super fans, which are over at Patreon. So you sign up at Patreon this time of year, you get a free copy of my 40-plus page concise draft guide with rookie draft strategy, historical information, prospect comp spectrums, all of that stuff that I put a labor of love in March, watching basketball, but also doing the draft guide. And again, you get that for free as one of my super fans, because I want you to try the content at patreon.com/UTH. So instead of selling it, I always felt a little smarmy, selling it like everybody else. And I was like, why don't I just give it away to the people that are most passionate about my work? And that's what I've done at Patreon.
Yeah, God bless you for it. I know those people love it, and it's creating more passion for all the work that you do with UTH Dynasty, with the Dynasty Think Tank, with Dynasty Think Tank Football Guys, so on and so forth. We're picking your brain tonight. You're giving away all this for free, which I appreciate. Let's talk about where you stand on certain players. Derrick Henry. Adam Schefter reported that it is a 2-year, $20 million deal worth up to $20 million, $9 million guaranteed. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in the same backfield. like Kramer would say, we're at the nexus of the universe, because this just should never happen in fantasy football, in NFL. Now, he's never had more than 33 catches in a season, any year in his career in Tennessee. But the run blocking unit for Baltimore was sixth best, according to Pro Football Focus last year. And I look at what Gus Edwards was able to do in that offense, and now I'm just, my goodness, thinking about what Derrick Henry can do. This is weird, Chad, because he's a running back that's getting up there, that his team let him test out the free agent market, but yet he lands in a really good spot, really good offensive line, really good offense, still a really good talented player. How do we make sense of this for Dynasty? Because this is a thing where the good might be really, really good, but it might be short-lived. How do you view Derrick Henry in Dynasty?
And it's weird because the Tennessee Titans let him go, and yet they gave a big contract to Tony Pollard. It's not like they have the huge allegiance to Tajay Spears, which I find fascinating. This is one of those where you kind of put it on the back of the napkin. You know, you're talking at a bar. What if Derrick Henry went to the Ravens? You know, you're talking about free agency a few weeks ago, and they never happened. You know, they always talk about the big wide receiver going to Patrick Mahomes. That's never going to happen. But we get this. I will say, Derrick Henry, 30 years old, I think he has more quality seasons left in him than some of these, you know, than maybe Joe Mixon, some of these, you know, Nick Chubb at 28 years old. So he's a young 30 for this year, in my opinion. And here's the other part. The Ravens, I have a little metric. I call it high leverage opportunity score. So it's HELO. It looks at targets plus goal line opportunities. The Ravens are so bad during the Lamar Jackson era. It's like a footnote. It's a punchline that I use. It's like they de-optimize the running back position. We've seen that. They just don't, since the Ray Rice era, or Danny Woodhead, I think was another one. They used to get targets, but now this is the offense that you go to not get targets pretty much. Lamar Jackson does not look at the running back position, but they get goal line. They've been sneaky decent. They were number 6 this year in running back goal line touches inside the 5-yard line. But overall, and it's driven by targets generally, that for fantasy production, they've been bottom 5 every year. Lamar Jackson has been the quarterback. So you say Derrick Henry, if he's only going to get 25, 30 catches, where would you like him to go? The answer is Baltimore, because he's going to get open running lanes. I mean, imagine him with a crease. He didn't get a whole lot of help in Tennessee. Lamar Jackson's going to hold that backside. And I think even though it's tough for Derrick Henry to get inside the top 4 or 5 running backs in fantasy because of the receiving element, unless he gets 15 plus touchdowns, which might be in play. But I think it's very difficult for him to get there as opposed to Breece Hall or Christian McCaffrey, whatever. But I think his floor is like a higher running back too, just because of the efficiency he's going to have, because of the goal line, because it's a stronger offense than he's almost ever had with Tennessee. I think this is an optimal spot. And if anyone fades him, especially these shorter roster leagues like FFPC, I think you have to really take into account that running backs are year to year, and investing in a rookie, like, you know, you're sitting there and like, hey, maybe that 110 pick is going to be Trey Benson, or insert rookie running back here. Derrick Henry has a couple of quality years in him. And if you get top 10 to 15 production for 2 years, that's better than what you're going to get on average out of that rookie running back in that range of the draft. There's no Ezekiel Elliott in this class. There's no Saquon Barkley coming in this class, pedigree wise or profile wise. So I think you have to be really careful about passing on Derrick Henry or selling him for just a random second as a team looking to contend and win this year.
That it's so crazy because I never, you know, not that I was ever the biggest Derrick Henry fan, because I wasn't. I love pass catching running backs. Derrick Henry just never was one. But now, because I think there's this perception of a lowered value for Henry because of age, and the fact that he, again, is still not catching passes, I think this could make him a buy in Dynasty. And I think that while initially I was kind of out on that, the more I listened to people, smart people like yourself, like, kind of thinking, my goodness, maybe I should be on the buying side of Henry right now. And I don't necessarily think the public has caught up to that yet, where you can actually cash in and get Henry for a pretty good deal right now. And come August, Chad, we might be licking our chops saying, God, I can't believe I got Henry for this little.
Well, yeah, remember that when you get to September and lineup season, you want Derrick Henry in your lineup. So I think it's tough to remember that in March and April when it's all about rookies and it's all about young players and flash. But the only 3 older running backs I have in over Derrick Henry in Dynasty, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Alvin Kamara. They all catch passes. Saquon Barkley's in a good situation as well. But the point is, he's over guys like James Conner and Nick Chubb and Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones, even Tony Pollard, who's younger, but still on the older side. So within the spectrum of older running backs, they're all going to have relevant roles here. Derrick Henry is still one of the better guys. This first year in a dynasty, or this current year, really counts.
Let's talk about my Green Bay Packers here with Josh Jacobs here, another big free agent signing for them. Now, this was really compelling because essentially they released Aaron Jones. He goes to the rival Minnesota Vikings, but they signed Josh Jacobs, who is younger, I think 3 or 4 years younger. I think it's 3 years younger than Aaron Jones. 4-year contract worth up to $48 million. This is more like a 1 or 2 year contract with a team option after the first year. I would think, and we found out that AJ Dillon's coming back as well, so we'll bring that into the conversation with Josh Jacobs being a member of the Packers as well. A guy who has been a fantastic pass catcher, 30 or more passes in his last 4 seasons, and quite frankly, in not so great offenses with the Raiders. You know, when they had Derek Carr, Jacobs led the league in rushing. Then last year, holy God, it was bedlam in Las Vegas. The coach gets fired. The OC gets let go. The quarterback situation was a revolving door. Sometimes a rookie, under center for the Raiders. I think that there's a lot to like about Josh Jacobs to the Packers, but I might be looking at this through my green and gold colored goggles, Chad. What do you think about Jacobs now on a Packers team without Aaron Jones?
Yeah, I think Aaron Jones gone, you lose a little bit of dynamic nature, but let's remember, even running a 4.6, Josh Jacobs has house call potential. You know, we saw he had a game winner that went 80 yards, I believe, last year. And he has high upside when the perfect storm happens. It did a couple of years ago with a top 5 finish. I think what you're looking for here is, number one, AJ Dillon back is good news, I think, for Josh Jacobs, in the sense that AJ Dillon, the more we watch him, the less we're impressed. You know, he's one of those old school 1985, 1990 running backs that would have thrived back then. He might have been a top 5 pick in the NFL draft if we had gone all the way back then. But now he's more of a dinosaur. Even though he ran the 4.5s, he's still a lumbering, low burst guy. Now for Jacobs, he's going to catch a bunch of passes. I think the biggest news here and why he moved up 3 spots in my dynasty rankings is because stronger offense. You have the Packers, a bunch of weapons. The Raiders, it consolidates through 2 guys. And the biggest factor is quarterback. What are the Raiders doing? And look what the Packers have in Jordan Love. Look what they found and they procured and they fostered as their 3rd quarterback now in like 30 plus years. Looks like they're on the right track again. So I think with the Packers' strong offense, that's going to give a lot more touchdown opportunities, because we've seen Jacobs really cash in from short range. And so I think big play potential Christian Watson. Let's put those hamstrings on ice here all the way until September. But I think Josh Jacobs is the rare guy that has 50 plus rush receiving upside. And then he also can run for 10, 12 plus touchdowns on the ground. And when you put those 2 things together, we saw it a couple of years ago, top 5 finish. So I think he's one of the few running backs that doesn't have a concern with receiving or with potential short range touchdowns or volume in general. So that's really good news for Jacobs. And again, I think the quality of the offense is the biggest storyline here to bump him up from where he was a few weeks ago.
And the fact that he is not like aged out. He's not 29, he's not 30, he's 26 here. So it should be at least 1, maybe even 2, or maybe more than 2 years of good production in Green Bay. Shifting over to the wide receivers, boy, you know, the more I look at X and read articles, the more and more polarizing this Nico Collins Tank Dell discussion is getting. Now, Nico Collins and the Texans could agree on an extension. They have not as of yet. He was a 3rd round pick. It's not like he was a pedigreed, top 10 overall pick or anything like that. But my goodness, 1,300 yards, 80 catches, 8 touchdowns in just 15 games last season, got over 16 yards per catch. I think that the question here is, what do we feel about Nico Collins when he's sharing the field with Tank Dell? What do we feel about Tank Dell when he's sharing the field with Nico Collins? I mean, obviously, if these guys are going to be target funnels without the other guy, we love them both. They're probably going to be on the same field together a lot next year. And they have a ascending quarterback in CJ Stroud here. A lot to like, but let's go in between the lines. Let's go second level with this. How do we view Nico Collins and Tank Dell? And more importantly, Chad, what should we be doing with these guys in dynasty leagues right now?
Yeah, I have them both in the top 20, and I think it's easy to be bullish on both. Tank Dell obviously was a rookie and highly impressive. When you hit over 2 yards per route run as a rookie with any decent sample size, it's a huge positive indicator. And not a lot of people were on Tank Dell. He went in the third, fourth round of rookie drafts or annual drafts last year. But Nico Collins is the breakout star. When you look at pretty much across the board, he outproduced Tank Dell on a per game basis. His 3.1 yards per route run, that's unless you're Tyreek Hill, who slums it to 3.1 in a typical year. I mean, this is a lofty figure that is a career marker for a lot of the great wide receivers in the NFL today. So I think Nico Collins did it so well, and he was almost a yard better per route than Tank Dell. So we can say that this is Batman and Robin. That's fine. But in my opinion, Nico Collins is the Batman. He's the prototypically sized guy. You see the types of routes he runs. Other than Mike Evans, it seems like every game he has 2 or 3 15 to 20 yard deep in cuts, and CJ Stroud loves that route. I really squint and see Mike Evans on some of those connections early. So again, you're talking about a guy that dominated targets in Nico Collins, 26% target per route run, the efficiency on a yard per route run basis. That is so rarefied air. Tank Dell was good. Tank Dell was very strong as a rookie. But when you say Nico Collins, yes, a little older, but still in his prime, he deserves a contract, and he is the alpha of that passing game. So when you have to be excited about that connection. That's why I have him closer to wide receiver 10 in Dynasty, and then Tank Dell is closer to wide receiver 20.
So you are team Collins on this. If somebody comes in and let's say you have Tank Dell on your team, Chad, are you only parting with him for a late first round pick at a minimum, or late first round, plus essentially? Because if you're a believer in Collins, it seems like you should be cashing in on Tank Dell right now, right?
Yeah, there's potential there. I have his valuation somewhere in the mid first round for picks and Superflex. One quarterback, it would need to be a little higher because, again, as much as you can like Rome Odunze or someone like that, if you are looking at, say, 105, it's probably wide receiver 3 of the class, might be running back 2. Maybe if it's premium scoring, you're looking at Brock Bowers in that range at FFPC or some format like that. But the thing I think you have to be careful with is Tank Dell is on a huge success track year one, and the odds that you get a huge success track year one off of the player you're drafting is not a lock. So I think it's really important. Sometimes you have a lot of arbitrage opportunities to take a veteran. And just to give one, I think the most misvalued price point here is Nico Collins. Like, I've been able to trade late first for Nico Collins earlier in the offseason, and his price hasn't moved much since. There's a lot of concern that Houston in the later first round would have drafted a wide receiver, and that they're going to be interested in the wide receiver market in NFL draft, but they have 2 good wide receivers. They're building up this offense in general. So I don't think it necessarily is a bad thing for, Robert Woods. They had plans for him. Noah Brown, he had a couple of good games, but they could get better. They want to supercharge this offense around Stroud's rookie contract. So I think Nico Collins in the later first is absolutely possible in the trade market, and Tank Dell is probably a similar price point. And again, I would go with Nico Collins of the 2, and I would throw out, say, a late first or an early second, and then add maybe a Jerry Jeudy type to get Tank Dell, just because you don't want to get too heavy at wide receiver with your roster construction.
Right. Yeah. And that makes perfect sense when it comes to that. I do have a bunch of other receivers I want to talk about. We're running out of time in this segment, so I'll bounce around here a little bit. You have any strong thoughts on Zay Flowers in Baltimore? We just talked about Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in the same backfield. Obviously, Mark Andrews is there, Isaiah Likely. We know Odell Beckham's not going to be back. Maybe he's a Miami Dolphin. Maybe he's not. But and I listen, I know Harbaugh was talking up Rashad Bateman. I have no sense for having Rashad Bateman on my team at all. But Zay Flowers, he's not polarizing yet, but it seems like there's a lot of fans out there of his. And then there's some people that are not quite sold on how he's being treated in Dynasty. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think he's a little overcooked. He was good, but not great. 1.6 yards per route run, which again is good. And let's keep in mind, Mark Andrews is Lamar Jackson's guy. So you say it's Mark Andrews is essentially the wide receiver 1. Zay Flowers is more of the wide receiver 2 on the offense. I don't think there's going to be competition from Bateman. Let's see if they bring back Beckham. Probably not, or anybody else that they bring in. It seems like they should bring in a wide receiver in the draft in some import, round 3 to 5, at a minimum. But Mark Andrews coming back healthy is going to be the biggest deterrent, because I think Zay Flowers benefited 100 plus targets a year ago, because Mark Andrews missed a decent amount of time. So that would be the biggest thing I would look for, because I don't think this offense is going to truly support a breakout wide receiver as long as Mark Andrews is healthy. And we might see more of Isaiah Likely as well, who showed his mettle later in the year filling in for Mark Andrews.
Mr. Bakes a lot watching us on YouTube right now. He wants to know if it's possible if the Jets would move up in the draft. We always talk about how these quarterbacks go, Chad. A lot of them get pushed up as we get closer and closer to the draft. And the latest guy who's getting pushed up, we'll get into this in the final segment of the show, but J.J. McCarthy is being rumored to be not only being taken top 10, but maybe top 5. And if we do have quarterback in the top 4, the Jets trading up to 5, they already have Rodgers. They signed Williams, but he's certainly not a long-term guy. They have Garrett Wilson there. What if Marvin Harrison is out there at 5? Would you see, or how strong of a possibility would it be if the Jets, were to make a trade to get up to 5 and add Harrison to Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams on that offense?
Well, yeah, definitely. And obviously Aaron Rodgers would probably lose a screw if they drafted a quarterback in the first round as the next in heir. But yeah, I think the Jets could go a variety of directions. I don't think they should be out on wide receiver. Obviously tight end is a need as well. So I think they could go a variety of directions. I do think the board probably aligns at 10 for them to go offensive line and supplement that position, because you can never be too strong, especially with a pretty stationary now older quarterback. So the last thing they want is Aaron Rodgers missing a chunk of the season or all of the season and have a repeat. So I think offensive line is probably the pick there. But again, I think Marvin Harrison and some of these wide receivers are going to have a ton of interest. But if you say offensive line or Brock Bowers is there for them at 10, I don't know if there's big incentive for them to move around, especially up the board.
Yeah, when you can get a difference-making player there, again, a tight end or offensive line, why would you sacrifice more, draft capital to get a luxury at the position when you can help fulfill a need and not have to sacrifice that draft capital? Great point. Speaking of draft capital, Kansas City Chiefs, they've won the last 2 Super Bowls. They don't need to do anything different than what they're doing. Nobody thought they could win without Tyreek Hill, and yet the God's gift of football, Patrick Mahomes, keeps getting it done, no matter what cards are dealt to him. However, the Chiefs recognized a deficiency. They went out and they drafted Rashee Rice, and now they've signed Marquise Brown to a 1-year contract worth up to $11 million. Chad, how does this affect? How do these 2 receivers affect each other? Rice and Brown on the outside. I know they still got Kelsey. To me, a rising tide raises all ships, and this should make everybody better. But maybe it comes at the expense of less targets, but maybe more efficient targets, if that makes sense. Your thoughts on Marquise Brown going to the Kansas City Chiefs?
I think they largely play different positions. They used Rashee Rice almost like Deebo Samuel, a lot of short targets, and they really exemplified his yards after catch ability. Travis Kelce was doing more intermediate work. What they needed is a potential upgrade to Marquez Valdes-Scantling or all of the other guys that were running routes down the field with big play potential, more boom bust. And the biggest thing for Marquise Brown, which again, he's been tapering off, only 1.25 yards per route run last year. That's sub NFL average, not very good. And he played a ton in Arizona last year. So he missed a little bit of time, the foot, the ankle stuff. As someone with ankle issues, I can tell you that it never really goes away. It's always there. And for Marquise Brown, it's going to be one where they're going to tape him together. Who knows how many full weeks of practice he's going to actually have in Kansas City. And they might, like we've seen with other players on huge Super Bowl run type teams, you slow play him because you want him there in December and January when it counts the most. So I think with Marquise Brown, he is an upgrade, obviously huge upside potential, but Rashee Rice is going to be unaffected. He was very good last year when he finally started getting a lot more targets. Kelsey's still going to be involved at 34 years old. So I think Marquise Brown is the perfect boom bust guy. It's almost Marquez Valdes-Scantling plus in this offense, if you want to think of it that way. And again, I think Marquise Brown is one that he's pretty affordable. I've seen him traded for mid-seconds, which you say, hey, I want to see how this pans out. Is this going to work? That's going to be better than the rookie you're going to draft there. So I like that price point. If it starts getting to a first round pick, too pricey for me because you have 2 other quality targets in that offense. So I don't know if the perfect storm, unless Rice misses extensive time, or Marquise Brown, we see the best of him, which has not been overly great with Arizona so far. That's the only high end, top 18, top 20 type outcomes I could see from this year.
If anybody can bring out the best in receiver, it's obviously Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. But I think you're right. I mean, the established guys there, Rice, Kelsey, they have different roles than what Brown does. And I'm obviously more bullish on those guys for redraft and dynasty more so than I am with Marquise Brown at the point he's at in his career. Carolina Panthers offense. They now have not only Adam Thielen, but Deontay Johnson is there as well, Chad. 51 catches, just over 700 yards last year in 2023. 100 yards, 100 catch, 1,000-yard receiving season in 2021, and now he was playing opposite George Pickens this past year. He was not happy with this situation in Pittsburgh. Is he going to be happier in Carolina? Are we as dynasty fantasy owners of Deontay Johnson going to be happier with him in Carolina? He's younger than Thielen. I think somebody who's making an argument over a duplication of skills between Johnson and Thielen, I think that's a valid argument. I don't know how much it impacts their fantasy production, but now Deontay Johnson, the Carolina Panther, buy, sell, or hold for him in Dynasty at this point.
Yeah, huge buy. This is one of my favorite moves of the entire offseason because you say, Carolina, what did they need? What they need is someone dependable outside of a 33, 34-year-old Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen was running on fumes by the end of last year. He was getting absolutely peppered. He volumed his way to 1,000 yards and 13 points per game, but it was relatively ugly with that offense. They've secured the middle of the offensive line there through free agency for Bryce Young, and typically with 101s, you see a nice step up in year 2. So that could be from really bad to mediocre. It could be to NFL average, but I think we're going to see positive steps for Bryce Young. TBD on what the actual upside is for fantasy or if Carolina is a feisty team in that division or anything like that. But they had to add. Jonathan Mingo was their big addition last year. He was horrible. If you want to say that Quentin Johnston was bad, put Jonathan Mingo right in that same bucket of disappointing career starts. Terrace Marshall, I think a year before that, also disappointing from second round. They've tried. They got a shot on Laviska Shenault. That's not going to work out either. DJ Chark is not there. So they needed to do something, and they don't have their first round pick. The early second round is going to look good. Maybe it's a Ladd McConkey type that I think would blend well in this offense. But Deontay Johnson is the exact type of wide receiver they needed. A chain mover, a guy that's more dynamic, more explosive in and out of his cuts than Adam Thielen. He's got some big play after the catch ability. And this is going to be someone I think is earmarked for 150 plus targets. And it's not a Vegas betting show, but I'm sure you can get really good odds on Deontay Johnson to lead the NFL in receptions or some bet like that he's a dark horse. But I think it makes a lot of sense when you consider this offense and where the ball is going to funnel. No tight end. Adam Thielen could fall off in a massive way. And it really could be Deontay Johnson without George Pickens there to siphon away opportunities from him in Carolina.
And Bryce Young is a young and up and coming quarterback. You would think he is going to focus on a reliable guy, and who's more reliable, who's more dynamic in this offense than Deontay Johnson. I think you could make a case that maybe Mingo is more dynamic, but I don't even know if that's the case anymore. Johnson is certainly a guy that we should be focusing on for Dynasty. Now, you mentioned you went through a litany of failed Carolina Panthers receivers here. I'm not saying that this guy is a failed Detroit Lions receiver, but Jameson Williams has not met the standards and the expectations that a lot of people who drafted him in Dynasty. You think about the torn ACL. You think about the gambling suspension, right? And he's just never really been able to get consistently going. Dan Campbell said that Jameson Williams is going to push to be a full-time starter this coming year. Over his last 6 games, he got 25 targets. I think part of the reason that he has not been excelling is he is a downfield guy. He is a very fast guy who gets past defenders, and Jared Goff is just simply not a guy who loves to throw downfield a ton. Why would you when you have Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown over the middle? He's 22 years old, maybe more of a best ball guy. I think last year you could not get a discount on him, Chad. Would you be looking to get a discount on Jameson Williams this year? This could be one of the, I don't know if you play fantasy baseball, but there's always like this whole, he's the closer in waiting. He's the next great closer for this team. And then these guys never develop into being those closers. Is Jameson Williams going to be the next great receiver for the Lions that just never develops?
Yeah, this is going to go back to something we talked about early in the show, which is just looking at the math of this offense. Sam Laporta breaking out was a major deal and major hindrance now to the hit rate probabilities of Jameson Williams. Amon-Ra St. Brown blocks out the sun. He's really good. He's arguably the top 3 or 4 receiver in all of the NFL. So you add that, they added Jahmyr Gibbs, huge pass catching weapon. it's an easy argument to say Jameson Williams, who was drafted highly in the NFL, missed his opportunity, missed his window, that now he's the fourth target in this offense. And you can be as dynamic as you want for Detroit's passing game. That's a tough combination. That's a tough equation to say that he can finish in the top 25 to 30. It's just really tough. Even if Amon St. Brown misses time, it's not the same routes. He's going to be that glorified deep threat. We just talked about Marquise Brown. He might be the Marquise Brown with a lesser quarterback with more competition for targets here in Detroit. And that's not good news. Jameson Williams, again, his window was last year. It would have been if he got off to a good start and Sam Laporta did not. Sam Laporta got off to a historical start. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to collect a huge volume of targets, and Gibbs is a toy that we feel like they're just playing with. Like they could use him more in the passing game as well. So I think Jameson Williams is caught in a bad situation where he made his own bad luck, where he had an injury and then the suspension. That's 2 years in a row where he was flat-footed, basically to begin his career in Detroit. So I still have him in my top 50 dynasty wide receivers, but looking at it, he could be 5 spots lower pretty easily, and that's really rare going into year 3 for a guy that has performed and had some moments and with high pedigree. But it just speaks to how difficult it is for him, I think, to wedge his way into a top 24 season.
There is no way we could be flat-footed on this show tonight because we have not stopped running since 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight, and we got almost another full hour to go. Here's what I want to do. I want to step out and take a quick break. When we come back, Chad Parsons from Under the Helmet Dynasty, contributor to Football Guys and the Dynasty Think Tank, is going to tell us what's going to happen to the Falcons offense with Kirk Cousins and now Darnell Mooney. The Commanders running game with Austin Eckler. Let's get into the Ty J. Spears talk and the Zach Moss conversation. I definitely think we need to get into as far as Dynasty Fantasy Football goes. Chad Parsons, Eric Balkman on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. We roll on right after this.
Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament is already open right now over at FFPC. Drafts are available daily, 2-hour clock or 6-hour clock, or the sit and go 30-second clock if you really just want to bang out a draft. Those are scheduled in advance, so you can go get set up on that. Take a shot either $25,000 or $10,000 grand prize. That's in the Never Too Early Best Ball contest. They got some big prizes over there, man. And you can play high stakes games over there too. So you can hit this QR code that's right in front of my face, or go to myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP, COOP. They'll give you $25 off when you deposit $35 or more. So go get set up right now. We're doing, we already do our dynasty, we do our redrafts over there, we do our high stakes stuff, but we do the playoff contest, we do it all. So I'm going to get in the best ball too. It's never, for me, whatever you got, whatever contest you got, I'm going to play, I'm going to win. That's it. So go over to myffpc.com, use promo code COOP, and you can win as well.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on the X from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and of course the road of his High Stakes Lowdown. He's Chad Parsons from Under the Helmet Dynasty, uthdynasty.com, at UTH Dynasty on the X, at Chad Parsons NFL on the X. You hear him on the Dynasty Think Tank, and check out him contributing to footballguys.com as well. Hey, we're going to talk, and we have been talking a lot about Dynasty tonight, which is Chad's forte. If you're looking to utilize a lot of this Dynasty coverage tonight and this Dynasty analysis, go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Pick up some Dynasty Orphan teams. We got a lot of great deals going on there. Some really, really good lowered entry fees for everybody, some as little as $1 this year. Numerous squads are looking like that at the $77 level all the way up to the $2,500 level. myffpc.com is where to go. The Atlanta Falcons offense in 2023. Oh, my goodness. So frustrating, Chad. Arthur Smith, Kyle Pitts underwhelmed. Drake London was hit or miss. Even Bijan Robinson. We had the Tyler Algier conundrum affecting Bijan Robinson's performance in some weeks last year. And Arthur Smith, I think a lot of people would say was to blame. He is now in Pittsburgh. And they have Zach Robinson there from the Los Angeles Rams as the new OC. No Desmond Ridder anymore. It is Kirk Cousins as the quarterback there, and they brought in Darnell Mooney to boot. This is an offense on the upswing. What's going to happen, in your opinion, to the Falcons offense in 2024? I think you might be muted, Chad. Or hold on. There we go. Got it. Go.
Drake London is one that you have to be most excited about. You look at what he's done. He's kind of the Garrett Wilson of this offense, or in Dynasty, a younger guy that has been efficient on a per route basis, but he's one that is underwhelmed largely because of situation. Almost 2 yards per route run for his career. And again, this is with Taylor Heineke. This is with Desmond Ridder. This is with castoffs at quarterback. This has not worked out for Atlanta. They've spent so much at the skill positions. And then the biggest skill position, quarterback, they have not gotten right. They have not invested in. And now they paid up for Kirk Cousins. So I will say that Drake London, a guy that is already seeing huge volume in terms of his routes, he is ready to explode in this offense. And this is defense is keyed on him. So a healthy Kyle Pitts, that's the biggest question mark, and cross your fingers. Can Darnell Mooney take the lid off and have a reclamation to maybe, wide receiver 60, 70, 80 in this offense? That would all help Drake London. So Drake London is a huge riser. He has a lot of buzz right now, as does Garrett Wilson. But I think it's warranted for both guys because Drake London has top 5 to 10 upside. When you look at his build, it looks like a Mike Evans type player. He can win all over the field. He can be a red zone target. And when you say this is a rising offense in general with now functional to even high level quarterback play, this is one to be excited about. And Drake London, to me, is the front man there.
Yeah, I love it. And I love my London shares. This is going to be a fun year for Atlanta. It's going to be awesome. Any way you're leaning on Kyle Pitts this year with Kirk Cousins?
I find it interesting that Kyle Pitts, let's think back, there were points that even though he was not producing to this level and you had Travis Kelce at peak powers, it was Kyle Pitts over Mark Andrews, over Travis Kelce early in his career. He was going to be that good after his rookie season. Ends up having injuries, taking a huge step back here. And the tight end position now with Trey McBride breaking out, Dalton Kincaid looking good, obviously Laporta and Hawkinson coming back in season at some point. It's so deep. I can't remember a tight end position deeper than we have right now with a mix of veterans, but largely younger players. And Kyle Pitts is right up there. I did move him up. I have him in tier 1 along with Laporta, Andrews, and Hawkinson there at the end of that tier. So Kyle Pitts getting that quarterback upgrade. The biggest thing for him is health. Can he start looking himself? Because he's basically a huge supersized wide receiver out there running so much out of the slot, running out wide. And I think this is really going to help him probably with Darnell Mooney outside the formation. This is going to get Pitts more in the slot. It's going to get more in line. And that's going to lead to even better matchups against safeties and hopefully, God forbid, for defenses, it's not a linebacker because that's just going to end up being a house call down the seam. So I think Kyle Pitts is one. It's a lot more accessible with Kelce probably coming back to the pack a little bit. We saw that last year. Laporta, a lot of competition for targets. I really think it could be Mark Andrews. And then who else could really challenge for number 1 overall? And especially with premium formats with scoring, Kyle Pitts is one that could be one of the big risers this year.
Yeah, he is going to be a big riser, I think. Rightly or wrongly, there are going to be people in Dynasty and redraft leagues that are going to bump him up because they believe in him. Now, there's another player that people have believed in the last couple of years, and it was wrong to do it last year because he was banged up with injury. 42 catches for 656 yards and 5 touchdowns last year for Tee Higgins in Cincinnati. He has been tagged, franchise tagged by the Bengals, and he has since requested a trade. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with Higgins going forward. I mean, certainly somebody could make a move and trade for him, maybe after the NFL draft. I don't know if that's going to happen, but there's a non-zero chance it could. As it stands right now, we hope healthy Joe Burrow is going to try to get back to the Super Bowl with Higgins on one side and Jamar Chase on the other. Your thoughts on what's going to happen to Tee Higgins in 2024, Chad Parsons?
What's interesting is I actually think the historical question of would you rather have a wide receiver 2 in a strong passing game or the wide receiver 1 in a weak passing game? Because if Tee Higgins gets traded, he's probably going to go to a quarterback that's bottom half of the NFL, maybe bottom 8, that bottom quartile. And yet Joe Burrow fueling that Cincinnati offense is top 8, in my opinion. So what's funny, the historical numbers come out about even. So think back to like DJ Moore in Carolina, right? No quarterback, but he's the number 1 guy versus a situation like Tee Higgins has. We've seen a limited ceiling from Tee Higgins. He got up to wide receiver 12. He had another top 20 season in his highlights in his first 4 seasons. But again, he's playing second fiddle. And that's really key here, which is I think Tee Higgins, there's not a big difference between the number 2 in Cincinnati, and there's not a big difference if he ends up getting traded. And what if he were to go to the Giants or someplace that has a big opening at wide receiver, you figure that would make a splash move? I don't think there's going to be a big difference. Drop in quarterback most likely versus the other available teams that he would go to versus, hey, I'm on a stronger offense, but more mouths to feed overall. So I think fantasy-wise, there's not going to be a huge difference. The perception, I think, if he's traded, will be it unlocks some big ceiling. But honestly, I don't think that's going to be reality. So if he is traded, the thing I would look for, if he's traded, that might be a time to trade out of Tee Higgins in your leagues just because there's a lot of wide receivers. I love to play the arbitrage game of, hey, give me a similar player, and give me a pick, or give me a pick upgrade so that now I can go out and maybe Tee Higgins could facilitate moving up for Malik Neighbors in your draft or someone like that, or Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think you need to seek elite results, not to go into a Dynasty think tank phrase there, but I do think Tee Higgins is going to be one that's good, but not great either place he plays this year.
Yeah, I think that's interesting when you consider, because I think for me, this is the kind of way I looked at like Mike Williams when he was released. I know some people are like, that's too bad he's not going to be with Herbert anymore. And I'm like, well, maybe he goes somewhere he could be the number 1 target. Now that didn't happen, but and at least in my head, I just think like, number 1 receiver. I don't care if it's on a worse offense, but number 1 receiver on a bad or mediocre offense, maybe not that different than where he's at right now as the number 2 behind Jamar Chase too. I think that's something to consider when we're trying to figure out what we need to be doing with these non-number 1 wide receivers. Another one is Jackson Smith-Njigba, who was obviously drafted in the first round last year. A lot of people very excited about his dynasty prospects. He ends the season with 62 catches, just over 600 yards, gets in the end zone 4 times. And I think it was wheels up for a lot of people with JSN because Tyler Lockett was, there was an easy way out for Seattle to part ways with Lockett. They didn't do that. In fact, they doubled down. They signed him to a 2-year deal. So now we will see Metcalf, Lockett, and JSN on this offense again this year. What do we make of how much do we need to read into this, Chad? How much do we need to read into like, okay, Seattle had this tailor-made, Metcalf and Smith-Njigba, and now they're bringing Lockett back into this? Are we reading too much into it? Do we need to take this pretty seriously as far as JSN's dynasty value?
I would take it pretty seriously. JSN, had a lot of allegiance coming out of Ohio State. He was a huge brand. However, he went in the later 20. He went in the later part of the first round. And I think that's important because a lot of wide receivers bust. It's actually less than 50-50 when you look at it with that back half of round 1 in the NFL draft. We're going to have a lot more in the top half of round 1 this year. But JSN was low last year, and it was a big amalgam. Who's the guy? A lot of people liked him compared to the others like Quentin Johnston and others. But Tyler Lockett coming back is huge because he's really good. You can say he's older. JSN's going to pass him. I wouldn't be so sure about that. And like you said, Seattle had an easy out here. They didn't take it. They've already locked up DK Metcalf. How much production from how many guys can we support with Geno Smith? I like Geno Smith, but they also brought back Noah Fant. And Noah Fant and Jackson Smith-Njigba were pretty close in yards per route run last year. Who's excited about Noah Fant right now? Not many. However, a lot of people are excited about Jackson Smith-Njigba as the wide receiver 3. Even if he gets to the clarified number 2 spot, I still don't think he can reach the expectations that a lot of people in Dynasty or Fantasy or NFL circles have for him. It's not right now. You have to press a pause button unless there's a litany of injuries. So for Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think he's overcooked. He's the exact type of guy that you can say, hey, can I find better production or better odds of strong production elsewhere, even if it's a little bit of an older player? Maybe DJ Moore is a little undervalued. Jackson Smith-Njigba is going pretty expensive in Dynasty right now. And I think, again, don't get over your skis. Can you can probably get Mike Evans plus maybe a late first round pick, which sounds crazy, but people are that resistant to age and that positive on a younger player that frankly, a lot of people are superimposing he had a better rookie season than he did.
I think that it's as Dynasty players, and Chad, you know this, we need to understand that while we spend all this time hemming and hawing about our early first round pick in rookie drafts, now we have a year of data and on these players at the highest level. Now we are going into year 2 and we see what these teams are doing. Values change, and just because you invested a first round pick into this guy at the 102 or 103 in like single quarterback leagues or whatever it was, or the 101 maybe even. You have to understand that like that is yesterday's price is not today's price. And I think the players that are quicker to get off that price and quicker to move on to try to improve these teams, improve their teams, might be better off here in the long run. So yeah, it stinks if you're trading JSN from less than what you paid for him, but think about that price could be later on in the season or next off season. All stuff to keep in mind here. Going back to the running.
The one thing I would say, just as a summary statement that globally will apply to more situations than just Jackson Smith-Njigba, is that you generally get a free pass with some of these younger pedigreed wide receivers year one into year two. So that period right now, that offseason, like you said, where even if something bad happens, Tyler Lockett comes back, he still has allegiance, he still has insulation. So like you said, you have the option to get out where it could fall way down if the season doesn't start well. And even if it bounces back up by next offseason, you don't want to burn a season with any particular roster spot if you had the flexibility months ago.
Austin Eckler is now with the Washington Commanders, ostensibly splitting time with Brian Robinson. I think the interesting thing here is Brian Robinson to me is a 2-down banger. I don't know how much he's going to give you on third downs, but I don't know how much Austin Eckler is giving you on first and second downs. Is this a contract that he signed? Is this a third down running back contract? It's worth up to $11.5 million. $4.82 million total in 2024. He could make another $1.5 million in incentives. I bring this up because the running back coach for Washington is Anthony Lynn, who was with the Chargers when Eckler was like a supernova in that backfield for the Chargers. And Cliff Kingsbury's there as well as the OC. Austin Eckler in DC, 8th round redraft pick right now, Chad. In Dynasty, you should be able to get him for a song. What's the right move here?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is something that you mentioned as part of your lead up, which is Brian Robinson really questioned the ceiling. You know, Austin Eckler is going to be one that siphons away. Think about Antonio Gibson at his best. You know, we didn't see his best a lot, but he's that pass-centric guy, get him in space. Eckler can do that to an even higher degree. So what's going to be left for Brian Robinson? And also consider this. Rookie quarterback in this offense. So are you going to get lightning in a bottle? You know, as much as we complain about Sam Howell, they threw the ball a ton, you know, and so there were a lot of targets. I think the targets go down. What if that's Jaden Daniels, the run-centric? How many targets and pass attempts are going to be taken out of this offense because they turn into scrambles, because they turn into, again, running plays for the quarterback? And even Drake May can do that to some degree as the two notable quarterbacks Washington would target there. So I think that Austin Eckler, the biggest concern is, does he get it back? He's an older running back that fell through the floor last year, 4 straight top 12 finishes, and then last year running back 22 in adjusted points per game. So I think you're talking about someone that is trying to get it back, and I think the ceiling is gone for Austin Eckler just because Brian Robinson is kind of that banger that the Chargers never found. They never found that with Isaiah Spiller. They never found that with Joshua Kelly and others. Larry Roundtree. They tried with day 3 picks over and over again. And Eckler had to be more of the guy than they wanted. I think what we'll see this year, hopefully healthy, but we're going to see more of that iteration that they imagined with the Chargers because they would have found somebody else. Well, the Washington has somebody else in Brian Robinson. So I think Brian Robinson, you got to reduce him, especially in PPR formats. And then Austin Eckler, view him as a running back 2-3 for lineups, and we'll see how it goes. But I think you start there and say now he's going to be that Danny Woodhead later career guy where catches 5-6 balls. It's a good day for him, but he might only have 3 touchdowns on the season, and that's going to be a big limiting factor.
And wasn't it Eckler who said he believed he was a better running back when he had a running mate in the backfield rather than having to do it all himself? So, I mean, you think maybe that's just a placebo effect, but at the same time, if this is the confidence that he has, knowing that he has somebody reliable next to him, I don't know, maybe it turns into better things with Eckler. We're really getting into the minutia on that one. Let's go to Tyjae Spears real quick. Is he just an injury away type guy now? Because this is a bad offensive line in Tennessee, or it's not a great one in Tennessee. And Tony Pollard is now the bell cow there, or at least we think the bell cow. Tyjae Spears was a guy a lot of people were excited last year about because they thought Derrick Henry could be gone. Well, Henry's gone, but now Pollard's there. The shine on Spears from a dynasty perspective is worn almost completely off now, Chad.
Yeah, the peak before free agency, Tyjae Spears with Derrick Henry rumored to be gone, and all the tea leaves were there. He got up to running back 12 to 16, which is kind of appropriate if you say true breakout. But what I always say is these hurdles of free agency in the draft, you got to get through them. You can't just assume that a guy is going to be a breakout star situationally as a round 3 pick the year before in January or February. You just can't do it. And he's a more of a subsized guy. And the other part is Tajay Spears. Let's go back to the draft process. He had a couple bad knees. There was the question marks about what's his durability going to be like? How long is he going to be in the NFL for? Dynamic player, but 205 pounds and a guy that might not be long for a big role. So now that they bring in Tony Pollard, which I kind of hate this for both guys because I wasn't a big Pollard fan. I thought he was miscast. He needed a running mate, as you just mentioned, and he had that with Ezekiel Elliott. He lost it, and frankly, he lost some of his juice as being an interior runner. So now Pollard goes over there, not as good of a situation. Spears is probably going to be, as you said, an injury away guy or the 1B. I think they're both going to lose. I think Pollard's probably going to be someone you start looking at projections for week 1. Pollard's going to be at running back 20. Spears is going to be at running back 35, and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a mess. We've seen that before where you're going to end up getting it wrong based on game script. And guess what? Tennessee might be bad. So that could lead to Tajay Spears. I think this is going to be a lot of confusion. Pollard's 27. Spears has those knees. And I just think it's an overall negative outcome here for that backfield this offseason so far.
Speaking of confusion, the Cincinnati backfield is interesting. Joe Mixon is now a Houston Texan, and then the Bengals went out and signed Zach Moss, 2 years, $8 million. He gets just over $4 million in 2024. Moss was unbelievable last year when Taylor went down, to the point where even Taylor came back. Moss was still being worked in by the Colts here. I was super high on Chase Brown, not necessarily from a talent standpoint last year, Chad, but the situation, knowing that Mixon might not be a Bengal in 2024, seeing what Chase Brown did down the stretch, got me very excited for my Chase Brown shares. And now it's very, very cloudy at best with Moss and Brown sharing that backfield. What kind of insight can you give us on how you think the Bengals are going to deploy these guys this season?
Yeah, I think Zach Moss, I want to go back because Evan Hull was a guy I was really excited about last year, got injured right away. It kind of led to Zach Moss having a lack of competition for that role without Jonathan Taylor. And frankly, the number 2 spot when Jonathan Taylor is back. So I think Moss, you look at the contract, it's pretty low level. So to say that they're locked in on Zach Moss week 1 starter, I don't think that's the case. They do like Chase Brown. This is a competition. And I would also say it's not over. We still got to get through the draft. So there's another chip to play here. I don't think they're going to be super happy with their running back 3. So that's another facet here. And again, Zach Moss is a guy that he played his best ball. One of my friends, Jordan McNamara, he's a huge Bills fan. He's like, I always asked him, I was like, did you see any of this in Buffalo? He's like, no, this is massively surprising for Zach Moss. So he was almost out of the league. And now here he is being rumored. And I've seen a wide range. Just to mention Dynasty cost, he's one that I've seen people turn down seconds in a trade offer. And I've also seen some trumpet him and say, hey, any 3rd round pick gets him. So I will say there's a market on both sides. If the market's a 3rd round pick, you have legitimate outs for the starting running back. I didn't think Joe Mixon was that great. And you saw a guy that was very productive in fantasy on that Bengals offense. So Zach Moss at a 3rd round price point, I love that. You start mixing in veterans there in the FFPC annual drafts, and I think that's going to be in play if he's in there in the late 2nd or even 3rd round when people are making cut downs, or if he was even rostered to end the season. So I think that he's one that you really have to explore the market. Selling for a 2nd to me is fine to stay flexible, but don't sell for a 3rd and maybe even buy for a 3rd because it's a wide range here with Moss.
It definitely is a wide range for sure. Quarterbacks, I want to touch on a couple of situations in the AFC real quick. The Pittsburgh quarterback room, radically different than what it was 2 weeks ago. It was Kenny Pickett. It was Mason Rudolph. It was Mitchell Trubisky. Now it is none of those guys, and it is Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Can you give us any sort of dynasty advice on how to handle Wilson and Fields? Let's assume super flex leagues or 2 quarterback leagues for this.
Yeah, I think Justin Fields is a massive lesson for us. 2 points on Fields, which is we love the rushing upside. That is the Konami code as it goes. It's the fast track to fantasy production. However, it gets you in trouble because I looked back and you see guys like Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, they progressed in their first couple of years as a passer to the point where the rushing was a super big fantasy boost, but they can hang as a passer, if not excel. So that's what you're looking for. can you transition? Justin Fields never transitioned. And what happens now? You get treated like you're not a starter in the NFL. There's big concerns by basically everybody, including your own team. I also think it's just bad luck, because if they had 106, 107, 108 in this draft, not 101, Justin Fields would probably be in Chicago right now. I think it's baffling they got rid of him. You need a good backup quarterback at a minimum. I'm honestly a little concerned about Caleb Williams if his camp said, we can't have Justin Fields there. To me, that's ridiculous. You need good quarterbacks. It's a quarterback league that one injury and you don't want your season to be toast. That's how Gardner Minshew gets big money. So I think Russell Wilson, he's been the superior passer their entire career. Even bad Russell Wilson the last 2-3 years, way better than Justin Fields in the NFL has ever been. So to me, this is not a competition. I think this is Justin Fields is going to be the backup. He's going to need Russell Wilson or the team to play poorly. And the Steelers don't generally play poorly. As long as you don't, they've been competitive every single year. So I think that's a real uphill climb. I would also point this out. Who's to say the Steelers don't trade Justin Fields? Who's to say they don't actually flip him in August when there's an injury, which the Bears should have done, which makes me think it's very centric to the quarterback they're going to draft on this guy can't be in the building. So I think the Bears screwed up. I think Justin Fields could still be a starter somewhere this year, but the best odds of that are not in Pittsburgh. It's somewhere else.
The Denver Broncos pick 12th in the draft right now this year. And Kirk Cousins is in Atlanta. Russell Wilson, obviously no longer a part of their organization. Justin Fields with Wilson in Pittsburgh. Not a lot of veterans out there that they could sign. Even Sam Darnold got scooped up by the Minnesota Vikings. There is a very real possibility that 4 quarterbacks will be off the board by the time the Broncos pick at 12 if they choose to stay at 12. Does this nebulous situation at quarterback for the Broncos concern you when you're talking about drafting players like Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, Javonte Williams, Chad?
Absolutely. Quarterback is the big driver. You want the best quarterback possible on your offense, and that gives you the best chance for big upside. I think it speaks to something at quarterback as well, which is Jarrett Stidham has played well in a couple different spots, and he right now is in the bird dog seat to be the week 1 starter. Even if they draft someone at 12, even if they end up with Bo Nix or Michael Penix, round 1, round 2, whatever it is, I think that Jarrett Stidham is going to get a shot. Now, we've seen those iterations, whether it's Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell, or others. It has not worked really well. That guy with not really much pedigree, and they just say, we're going to roll the ball out and see how it goes this year. But he has good enough weapons. I would say that this is one where Jarrett Stidham is a good example in your super flex leagues of guys that this is why you need to kind of be in on the waiver wire on any quarterback that gets a shot, because if they perform well, we saw so many of them get recycled to prominent backup roles, Drew Lock and others this offseason, where you want to keep them rostered the following year and see what happens. Gardner Minshew's a guy that starting opportunities, he's going to keep getting, spread around with opportunities and probably starting this year. So I think Jarrett Stidham is the big takeaway here, that they didn't make a big move, as you said, and now the likelihood of Jarrett Stidham week 1 starter and having a viable shot to be a guy that's a top 20, 25 quarterback in fantasy, you now have odds that are elevated now with Stidham.
Yeah, the Broncos situation, I don't know. That could turn into a dumpster fire fast. It could surprise a lot of people, too. Just one of the many things we're concerning ourselves with, not only for Dynasty Fantasy Football, but 2024 drafts as well. And, oh, by the way, we haven't really hit on any rookies yet, and we do have some time left in the show. So let's step out, take our last break. When we come back, I do want to talk about Drake May and J.J. McCarthy here with you, Chad, for sure. Let's get into some Braylon Allen talk. And then those Florida State guys, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, I want to get your thoughts on them as well. He's Chad Parsons from Under the Helmet Dynasty, uthdynasty.com. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
If you're not playing Dynasty Fantasy Football right now, where we're still out there doing all sorts of trades and moves, everybody else that does like casual gamers that do redraft, they're done, and they're just kind of speculating or like talking about the draft. We're still playing. Like if you play Dynasty, we play all year. I play over at FFPC. If you want to play there, use promo code COOP, C-O-O-P. We'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more at myffpc.com. And there's 2 ways to jump in over there. You can either do a startup, in which case you can get Dalton Kincaid way after guys like Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. Brock Bowers, I just saw that the rookie Brock Bowers even before the draft, they're projecting him to go as like the tight end 2 in these startup drafts. Crazy, right? Like right after Laporta, which is nuts. Like you can get Kincaid, or if you don't want to do a startup, I think this is even more fun. You go out and take over an orphan team, right? So over at FFPC, they never close the leagues down. They just take the teams and if somebody has to leave or whatever, then you can buy in and take that team. So you can go find a team that has Kincaid and a bunch of players you like, and you keep those players, and then you look at all the other players you don't like, and you have the golden opportunity to trade them away. Like it's so much fun to take a team and be like, okay, you know what? Because if you do a startup, you love all the guys already. Like those are your babies. If you do an orphan team, then you can trade away all the guys you don't like, and that's even more fun. Honestly, you have the golden, the green light there. So go to myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more, and you'll give you a leg up versus starting your own league. Now you got to chase people down for dues. You got to pay your own money. So go get set up over there.
20 minutes plus is plenty of time to get into the rookie class here. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. He's Chad Parsons at Chad Parsons NFL on the X, from Under the Helmet Dynasty at uthdynasty.com. I want to remind everybody before we get into these rookies, the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription is available at your fingertips. All content for all sports, including annual draft guides, is available. One-on-one expert access in the Discord. Sync up your leagues, analyze matchups and trends in your specific leagues that you're competing in. Don't forget about the lineup generator, daily and weekly rankings, the waiver wire, ownership percentages, projections, stats, and tools, all available to you. Build better lineups, guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year long. Promo code LOCK, L-O-C-K, at fantasyalarm.com/lock. Chad, you have been getting involved in some conversations on the X about Drake May, about J.J. McCarthy. I'd like to hear you expand upon those thoughts about let's take Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels out of it right now. Let's just talk about those two players. How do they compare and contrast with each other as far as how good of fantasy players they're going to be at the next level?
Well, yeah, Drake May, some of the hate, he's a very divergent prospect. You either love him or you hate him. In relative speaking, he's elite, in my opinion. He's everything you're looking for in a typical 101 selection by the NFL draft. We just happen to have 3 of those guys that are on that spectrum for this year. Someone's going to benefit at 2, at 3, etc. For these NFL teams, but Dynasty as well. You're going to go into the draft and everyone's going to go for Caleb Williams. But Drake May, in my model, a 99% passing score. You look at the big time throws he's able to make. You look at his scramble rate, the fact that he's able to elude pressure. He's prototypically sized. You would draw this guy up. Bill Parcells would love him in terms of that's what you think a quarterback should look like as a franchise changing quarterback up at the top of the board. So Drake May has that underrated rushing ability that I think is going to be really appreciated. And I feel like some of the stink, the down final year, doesn't quite have the weapons. It's very Justin Herbert-esque. And we saw Justin Herbert, quote unquote, fall in the draft. Certainly one of the best we've seen in recent years as a prospect. And yet he did not go in the top 1, 2, or 3 of his class. So I think Drake May is getting a lot of that down final year. Devontae Walker missed a chunk of time and he really had no one else in that offense. And yet Drake May is probably going to have better weapons in the NFL than he had in college. And I think that's a huge boost for a guy that can already make those big plays and have the mobility with prototypical size.
Does McCarthy need a full year behind somebody to be as successful as he can? Because I know if somebody trades up for him, maybe even into the top 5 of the draft, Chad, there's going to be pressure on McCarthy to play right away. I'm not so sure he's ready to play right away.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario would be Minnesota. Minnesota, maybe he wouldn't be the week 1 starter. You look at the big time weapons. I know they have a contract issue with Justin Jefferson. We'll see if that works out. But Jordan Addison, they'll get TJ Hawkinson back. It's a really strong offense to drop in a rookie quarterback, and McCarthy can start at some point in year 1, maybe in October. McCarthy to me is good, but not great. He's not really much. He's not a big runner. He doesn't have an elite passing score. But let's remember he's 21 years old. There's a lot of development to go there. Typically 22, 23 is that sweet spot for quarterbacks coming out of the draft. But McCarthy the winner tag, I'm not a big optics person on that, but I do think McCarthy can play it safe, run an offense, and basically be a coach on the field, not try to go outside of structure as much. And so that's why I'm really looking at Minnesota, who made that trade preemptively to get another first round pick. They are a wild card to move up, maybe with the Chargers at 5, somewhere in the top 5, 6, 7, to say we're going to go get a quarterback. And the likelihood is it would be for JJ McCarthy. So I think that's his best case scenario. If he ends up dropping into Denver or another one of these teams later on, and especially if he drops outside the top 10, I would be a little more concerned with McCarthy and how that's going to translate right away to the NFL.
A guy who is not expected to go in the top 10 as far as quarterbacks goes, Michael Penix Jr. put up insane numbers at Washington, not only this year, but the year before as well. But he's had a lot of problems. Shoulders, both his shoulders, knees, both his knees. I mean, this is a guy that it seems like, I followed the Big Ten, obviously. I remember when he was at Indiana. It seems like this guy has been playing since the Obama administration in college football. It's been crazy. Yet he gets to the national title game last year, looks pretty good doing it. I know he had 3 really talented receivers that he was throwing to. Penix expected to be probably in the second round. Your thoughts on Superflex leagues? Is Penix a guy that his skills and his output is going to translate to the next level?
Yeah, I kind of think of Tua Tagovailoa in a lot of ways with Michael Penix. Classic passer, a guy that when the play breaks down, frankly, he could break down. I think that's pretty concerning. And the interesting thing on Tua is he was a low QB1 in fantasy, despite leading the league in passing yards, despite having 2 dynamic receivers, as well as a strong offense around him. So if that's a best case fantasy scenario for Michael Penix, that's a lot of ifs. That's a lot of low probability outcomes. Like, get yourself some really good weapons in a good system, and then optimize it and be one of the leading passers in the NFL. And then you're going to be quarterback 8 to 10. Like, that's not a lot of big payoff. We would like a runner. He's an elite passer, but again, Seinfeld, I choose not to run. Well, Michael Penix chooses not to run. It's probably because of all those injuries. You'd probably want to stay stationary and get the ball out quick as well, just so you can keep yourself duct taped together to play longer and get to the NFL and all these things. I do think Michael Penix is the biggest name, not Bo Nix, that could fall A, to the second round, B, why not the third round? There isn't as many quarterback needs as there were 6 weeks ago, spreading around the talent around the NFL. So I think with Michael Penix, you have to be aware that he might be the quote unquote faller, the Will Levis, if you will, as we watch on Thursday night and maybe partway through Friday. But he's an elite passer. I just wonder when things go wrong. I almost hope Penix goes to a quality situation that he can be like San Francisco would be ideal, sort of that read, progress, and get the ball out to really good pass catching. Can he go almost to somewhere where he's a number 2 quarterback, developing into a number 1 if needed? I think if he goes to a quote unquote open landing spot and plays right away with subpar weapons around him, it could derail him right away. So I think with Michael Penix, there's a huge range of outcomes for Dynasty. I think the key word here, though, is limited upside, because you get so much production and fantasy points from rushing, and Michael Penix is going to almost have none.
What about the fact that he had all 3 of those guys? You talk about Polk and Odunze, and was the other guy McMillan?
McMillan, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, does the quarterback make the receivers? Do the receivers make the quarterback? I think of, I was just thinking about this the other day, about a quarterback that it never worked for him in the NFL, but he put up great numbers in college and you look at the receivers he had and they were unbelievable. Is there any of that thought with Penix? Like, maybe I should be nervous about this guy because of the talent he was throwing to?
Absolutely. The better weapons you have, I almost think, you think Josh Allen, you think this past year with Drake May, you would almost rather have underwhelming weapons in college, because then the quarterback is going to say, this is great. I've got NFL level wide receivers, strong ones when I get to the NFL, as opposed to I'm playing with, and the same sort of thing with Jaden Daniels, a little worried because he's going to have 2 top 20 probably drafted wide receivers in this class, and a couple other guys that are breakouts waiting to happen, and that was his wide receiver core. He's going to go to probably an underwhelming situation, unfortunately for him. So, I honestly, whoever goes at 3, I think that's a critical spot, because the Patriots are not well set up. Washington a little better off. So it could be rough depending on who goes at 2, who goes at 3. And like we said, Minnesota as a trade up versus one of these other spots could really be a differentiator in terms of their initial weaponry around them.
I want to talk about my Badgers here and Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen is a guy that did not do much at the combine. And so we were very excited to see what his pro day was going to be. His pro day was last week. And then he also pulled the Seinfeld, choosing not to run there. He did not do a lot of the agility tests. He said, now he had a high ankle sprain against Ohio State, and he said it's taken longer to recover from that than he sort of thought it would, which I guess I can buy. He said he was taking it day by day, whether he's going to run the 40 or not. He decided not to at the pro day. The tape looks good. A lot of the scouts have said that they feel good about Braylon Allen. Do you feel good about Braylon Allen at the next level, considering this guy is probably not going to be taken until, I don't know. At this point, I don't think he goes in the second, Chad. I think it's probably third is his ceiling, which gives me pause because of the draft pedigree. And, watching this guy over the years, I know he caught more passes this past year because the offense changed a little bit, but I do feel some trepidation with drafting Braylon Allen.
Yeah, a lot of good, a lot of bad with Braylon Allen. I think if he had worked out, I think if a couple things looked a little better, he could easily be the running back one of this class. Frankly, you rewind a couple years, freshman breakout, 17 years old. This guy's a baby that he's not going to be able to drink for a few games in the NFL. He's so young at 21.x to start his career. So I think the fact that he's a big hulking option that, again, no testing. We kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, have a little bit of pause with these guys, not Marvin Harrison Jr., but have pause with other guys that if they don't run, you get no data points on their athleticism. Take concern and pause there. And I think Braylon Allen, being a bigger running back, we've seen Derrick Henry, but how many others truly succeed at the NFL level where Derrick Henry is a cyborg and he's an alien in terms of a different kind of cat. But Braylon Allen, again, 17-year-old breakout, 230 plus pounds, a guy that can catch the ball enough to not say that he's a true 2-down option like we had DeAndre. I can't remember his name, from Washington, from Minnesota last year. But Braylon Allen is one that, again, elite rushing score, but if you're assuming he's 4.50, 4.55, it's risky. It's risky, and he might turn out to be an A.J. Dillon type in the NFL where he's just a couple decades late. So I would have a lot of pause there in terms of projecting Braylon Allen. I think round 3, round 4 is fitting. And like you said, with that pedigree drop, you need to have a little more concern. DeWayne McBride, by the way, was the guy out of UAB I was thinking of, just a true 2-down guy. And that's a huge limiter that he was not able to really see the field much at all with Minnesota last year.
I want to say, I think Mel Kiper had him as his number 2 running back for until the start of the NFL draft. And then he dropped him. It was crazy. I remember there's a lot of people taking DeWayne McBride late in the rookie drafts and then in redrafts as well, just to try to hit on something. They didn't hit on anything. Now, a polarizing running back, speaking of running backs this year, is Bucky Irving, a guy that can catch passes. And there's a lot of people very excited about his chops in the NFL. There's also a lot of people that said, pulling the Steve Harvey, slow your roll, player. This is not a guy that you need to be hitching your wagon to. I think he's somewhere in the middle for me. Where is he for you, Chad?
Yeah, I just wrote up Bucky Irving for the UTH NFL draft guide, and he was on my avoid and overrated list. A big reason for that is everyone's pulling out Kieran Williams. Like, oh, he's small. Oh, he didn't test that well. He's the new Kieran Williams. And I would remind folks, Kieran Williams was fostered in a Ram system for 2 years, getting insulation. Cam Akers did not work out, a second-round pick, and there was minimal competition. I love Ronnie Rivers, but let's face it, we know who he is. And that was the situation for Kieran Williams to shine in year 2, as a lot of people already bailed on him in Dynasty leagues. And if that's the best case outcome, which in my comp spectrum, the best case is Kieran Williams. Kieran Williams is a huge outlier. So Bucky Irving, again, if you're below about 200, 205 pounds, really concerning for fantasy upside in the future. He's 5'9", a $195, ran 4.56, a 9% athleticism score, a 36% rushing score in my model, did not have a rushing breakout in college. And that's the guy that I still see drafted round 3, round 4 of the NFL draft. I almost hope he gets that pedigree because I think that's just going to elevate his price and it can be an easier pass for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'd love to see too. Because I want other people taking guys like that. I don't. And you know what? And the other thing with Williams too that you bring up, I drafted him a lot last year in redraft leagues towards the end because and redraft is totally different than Dynasty. Just because I think it was Jordan Rodriguez for ESPN. She said that Williams is catching a lot of passes here in training camp, and I'm like, okay, I'm on board with that in the 16th round. But I'm not going to go crazy and pick him higher than that. I was totally out on Williams after the NFL draft. I want nothing to do with this guy. And the fact that we were wrong about that, or at least right now we're wrong, doesn't mean that the process is broke. It doesn't mean like, okay, the exception here means that we need to reevaluate this. No. There's going to be exceptions to anything. Williams was one. Will he continue to be one? We'll see. But I'm not changing, the way I feel about running backs when they have workouts and measurables like that.
And you would have held a year and a half if you would have drafted him in the fourth round of a rookie draft, which no one really would have done other than a taxi squad situation. So you have to be super careful about I'm going to draft an outlier. I'm going to hold him, develop him year 2, year 3. We don't have time for that. Dynasty's a long-term game, but it's short-term roster spots a lot of times.
Yeah, that's another great point too. Nobody was letting Kyron Williams marinate on their rosters for sure. Let's finish the show up with some receiver talk. Brian Thomas Jr. Was the second banana to Malik Neighbors with Jaden Daniels and LSU this last couple years. He put up some great numbers. I mean, this guy's probably going to be drafted in the first round. Do you think the Malik Neighbors heat that everybody's talking about is cooling Brian Thomas Jr. off unfairly? Should we be talking about this guy more than we have been?
I go back and forth. Brian Thomas has some flags in his profile, historically speaking. Big time athlete in round 1, but not that much of a producer. So round 1 obviously is very important, but there's a difference if you go top 5, top 10 versus the rest of round 1. So Brian Thomas, even if he goes in the teens or the 20s, we just talked about Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston, and others where you went high, but you didn't go all that high. You didn't go in the rarefied elite Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors sort of air of the draft. You mentioned he was second banana. He wasn't really the true alpha. So a lot of his yards per route run, targets per route run figures are low from what you're looking for. So the real thing is the litmus test of, do you give him a pass because he's with the top 10 pick on his roster? Or do you say, hey, you got to produce, and that's just not a profile that I would want to believe in? I typically go with, if you were not an alpha guy and all the targets kind of funneled your way, you weren't the big guy on campus, I'm usually pretty skeptical, going to the NFL level. I think Brian Thomas is going to get drafted. Hopefully he goes to a secondary spot, a wide receiver 2 kind of spot with a strong wide receiver and strong quarterback, maybe a Tee Higgins type outcome in a best case scenario. But ultimately his comps did not come out good that well. Robert Meacham is my middle ground comp for him, which one marginal fantasy season out of there. So I think Brian Thomas could be a good addition NFL wise. I think fantasy upside wise of him becoming a top 10 dynasty guy, him becoming, the next Nico Collins in a year or two, I think that is going to be really hard for Brian Thomas's profile to achieve.
Let's talk about the Xaviers here. Obviously, Xavier Worthy from Texas resets the combine record for the 40-yard dash. And then you also have Xavier Leggett from South Carolina. These are players, and I think I was listening to you and Jordan talk about this on the Dynasty think tank. I could be wrong, but there is a little bit of concern for these receivers that don't go towards the top of the first round, that go sort of at the back end of the first round. And I think that's where Worthy and Leggett are sort of looking at right now. Your thoughts on the Xaviers heading into the NFL draft, Chad?
Yeah, for me, Xavier Leggett is a pretty easy conversation just because he's a total boom bust profile. He was a 5th-year guy before he finally started to produce. And that's a huge red flag. The thing I always say is, if you are really a freak of nature, and so you are hulking 220 plus pounds, you run 4.3 something, why are you not dominating in college with a bunch of guys that are not going to be playing in the NFL? Why does it take you till 22, 23 years old sometimes? And that to me is a big red flag. So you're probably lacking the positional skills, route running, nuance, throttling down, breaking off your stem, looking the same on every route. He probably lacks all those. Again, there's a lot of proxy of just looking at data, and you don't have to sit there and watch 3 hours of film, route for Xavier Leggett to have a sense of what's going on. If you have a 90+% athlete and a 20% production guy, what does that tell you? He's boom bust because he doesn't really know what he's doing. Could he develop into what he's doing? Maybe. But wide receiver is the riskiest position. I'd rather take a boom bust guy at tight end. I'd rather take a boom bust guy at running back because it's about physical skills. Wide receiver, it's about nuance, and it's really hard, like quarterback, except not as hard. So I would say Xavier Leggett, the biggest thing is if he gets round 1 pedigree, again, the boom bust profile like Brian Thomas matters a heck of a lot less, but really be watching Thursday night. If Xavier Leggett gets through the first round, be really skeptical of him in Dynasty because you don't get that moniker. And the boom bust day 2 wide receiver, they're a dime a dozen, and they usually leave you penniless, at the end of the day. So be really careful with that. In terms of Xavier Worthy, he's the opposite. 95% production score guy, and he torched the combine. So you're getting a big time athlete, but a guy that knows how to play. And I would say this, I've seen his projections now. Like, he was a common one to go in the early second round in mock drafts a couple months ago. Now he's going regularly in the late first round. Everyone wants to put him to Kansas City. That sounds fine. I don't think he's making it. I think there's some interesting spots there late, actually mid first round. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be in on a wide receiver, 17 overall. I remember Will Fuller torched the combine. It was like 4.31 or something. He zoomed up from a second round pick. He went in the early 20s. I don't see how a Xavier Worthy even gets to Buffalo, even gets to Kansas City at the end of the round. I think there's going to be a team. I don't know if it's Cincinnati. They could obviously uptick and backstop that position if Tee Higgins isn't going to be on the team. But I think there's a load. The Steelers are going to now be in on wide receiver at 20. I think the Jaguars are drawing live at 17. And the Colts at 15. I wouldn't put any of these spots out of the realm of possibility for Xavier Worthy to go much higher than people expect.
The last thing we'll end with tonight is the Florida State Seminoles, guys. Johnny Wilson, the massive wide receiver for the Florida State Seminoles the last couple of years, put up some really good numbers this year with Jordan Travis. And then the tight end, Jaheim Bell, who I believe was a South Carolina transfer, played at Florida State last year. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes these players unique?
Absolutely. They're both unique. Johnny Wilson is 6'5 plus. He in the model, he comes out as a Brandon Marshall type player for me. Oh. People want to say Mike Evans. He was not that productive. Brandon Marshall went in the 4th round. He ended up being a high volume and impact player in the NFL. So again, I think he's someone that now he's looking at more at the 3rd round. But you want rare guys. He worked out really well. And again, not many 6'5" guys can move. And Johnny Wilson is that. Now, Jaheim Bell, he's listed as a tight end. That'll be important for your tight end premium formats. But Jaheim Bell, he played a little running back. He played all over the formation. I almost view him as a little bit of Kyle Juszczyk, a little bit of sub-sized tight end. Heck, if you want to line up in the backfield and get a few more carries than, say, a George Kittle from now and time again, I think all that could apply to Jaheim Bell. My problem with Bell is I don't know where he fits. Like Johnny Wilson's, they thought he might convert to tight end or something. He's playing wide receiver now with the good testing. But Jaheim Bell, he might be a really nice and fun player on a fantasy, on an NFL offense. I almost wonder if the 49ers could look at him in round 3, round 4, round 5. But fantasy-wise, I think it's going to be one where you kind of want to sit on the sideline, don't get excited and draft him in the 3rd round or something, just because I don't think he's going to have a real defined role and place for him that's going to make a lot of sense. He may end up being not the quarterback part, but maybe a Taysom Hill type, or it takes him some time to actually see where do you fit in the right offense.
Chad Parsons at Chad Parsons NFL on the X, at UTH Dynasty on the X, Under the Helmet Dynasty at uthdynasty.com. Give us a plug for the website. Tell us about the Dynasty Think Tank podcast, and tell us about the Patreon, as well as you guys, you and Jordan McNamara have a Patreon for the Dynasty Think Tank as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So Dynasty Think Tank as well as Under the Helmet, those are 2 Dynasty shows you can find on any podcasting platform. Patreon attached, which is /Dynasty Think Tank over there if you want to support Jordan and I. And then I have my own at patreon.com/UTH. I mentioned the free draft guide earlier, but again, free. It's actually cheaper than signing up for 1 month of Patreon at the All Pro tier. All that content I mentioned. And again, if you like just a piece of this, I record probably 1,000 podcasts a year between all the different platforms. So Eric records a ton, and we are just busy people in the space, which is you like to record, you like the audio medium, and the premium podcast structure, the Patreon structure. It has just made a lot of sense for me and my roadmap of content, as well as adding Dynasty Think Tank to UTH over the years, which has really been great.
And obviously all the content that you put out, or at least every time something new comes out, at Chad Parsons NFL, that's where people can follow and then follow the links to check it out.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, Chad Parsons, ladies and gentlemen. A fantastic guest tonight. I want to thank him. I want to thank Matt Deutsch, our producer. We'll be back live next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Check out the Fantasy Pros Championship, the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments, as well as all those Dynasty Orphans available for you now at myffpc.com. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. For Chad Parsons, I'm Eric Balkman. Talk with you next week.